This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
And welcome back to another episode of Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com, the podcast about the dark side of creativity. I am one of the hosts of this show. I'm Brad Kelly. This is Kevin Kautzman. Kevin, before we get into it, how you doing, man?
Super, never better, Brad.
Okay.
I'm having a fantastic Advent, preparing for the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I'm also rocking a hat. So I want to, if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to see this hat. For those who aren't watching on YouTube, Brad, what does this hat look like? Describe the hat.
It's a white hat with a I guess a gold colored logo on it that seems to be a meat cleaver. And what is it cutting? What is it?
It's a bear.
It's a bear.
It's a white hat for White Bear Lake Go Bears.
Yes,
oh yeah, you
Bears.
betcha. And this is just a little shout out. This is not a paid placement. Nobody told me to do this. This is a shout out to my butcher and his team at White Bear Butchery, hitherto Flicker Meats in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. If you are fortunate enough to be in the region, you got to get over to this place. They take care of me. They make the most incredible deli sandwiches. They've got, it's one of these places where, and I know Bourdain is like, people have kind of mixed opinions about Bourdain in hindsight or whatever, but like, it's the kind of place where if Bourdain came to town and said, Kevin, take me around, where would you go? This is probably the first place I would take him. So there you go. Shout out to Jeremy and the team, because they always take care of me. And this podcast is sponsored by, or is like powered by
Powered by.
I don't know what it's powered by on Brad's side, probably like dark occult rituals in the tarot. But on my side, it's powered by iced coffee and roast beef sandwiches and 2 large meat freezers that I have in the basement. I get big orders of meat from, this is the Art of Darkness podcast, by the way, the podcast about the dark side of creativity. I'm Kevin Kautzman. We're ready to rock. And Brad, this is a core episode, by the way. Last little anecdote. I make these big orders with Jeremy and the White Bear Butchery, and he sent me home one day with so much meat that I had to like race to Home Depot to get a second meat freezer. My cup overfloweth with protein.
Wonderful. And they do a great job. I was there when I was there for the in the Twin Cities for the live show. We went there and we got a sandwich and it was fantastic. So I can second this. That you should definitely go to. It was called Flicker Meats at the time, I think, still, but
I think still Yeah, I think still maybe if you're on Google, you're going to look up Flicker Meats. But I'm telling you, if you're in the Twin Cities, even over in Wisconsin nearby, this is like a destination place. Go and get a sandwich. You will not regret it. It'll be like one of the best sandwiches of your life. And then just right down the way, there's like a nerd cafe, Battleground Cafe. I love those guys. Those guys are great. They have like, coffee and you can play Warhammer. If you're in town, just,
Yeah,
whatever. But
that's
it's
the
a
thing,
whole,
man.
it's a good scene, man. And there's a lot of good stuff in strip malls here. I just recently posted a tweet about the Cut Cafe, which is Keys Cafe in
Okay.
Roseville, which is where the Coens filmed
Oh, okay. Yeah.
the cuckold scene
Mhm.
in A Serious Man. So every time I go in there, and it's so fun because it's a Norman Rockwell kind of a vibe. Everybody's chilling out and talking about their grandma and their grandpa, and every time I'm in there, I'm thinking about that scene from the Coen brothers because that's where they shot it.
Yeah,
Anyway,
excellent.
all right.
Excellent.
I know everybody loves our core episodes. This is what we are here to do. What do you got for us, Brad?
Yeah, well, today we're going to talk about Nina Simone, and I guess we'll get kind of right into asking the Art of Darkness opening question. Kevin, what do you know about Nina Simone?
Jazz singer, iconic, considered one of the all-time great jazz singers. Certainly one of the all-time great female jazz singers.
Mhm.
African American
Mhm.
lady, and Blood on the Leaves.
Mhm.
I kind of have the impression of her as almost like she's like a kind of a thinking person. She seems very thoughtful
Mhm.
and a true artist, an artiste,
Mhm.
uh, not pop
Mhm.
at all. And obviously, you put her on, and it's a vibe.
Yeah, yeah,
But as far as her life is concerned, I know woefully little, but that is why we do this show.
right.
And so I can't wait to dig in further,
Yeah.
Brad. I mean, 20th century,
Mhm.
mid century. I assume she lived in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, she was
I
alive
don't
in the
know.
70s and the 80s. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's about all right. She would push back on the jazz singer label, but you would be not the first and or nor the last person to call her that. And we'll get into why she would push back on that. It's actually kind of an interesting aspect of the Nina Simone story. But yeah, that's all that's all right on. I think we'll kind of get into, I guess, why we're talking about her specifically. I mean, we pick artists to cover on this show for a variety of reasons. We sometimes we do it just because we think that their work is interesting and we wanted to know, or great, or has appealed to us, and we wanted to know, almost on a personal level, more about them and then share that with you guys, the audience. Other times it's we pick a person because we think they're an important moment in cultural history. And so if you understand their work and their story, you understand something broader about cultural history. Other times we kind of want to shine a light on somebody who maybe hasn't been noticed as much as they should be. Sometimes we pick a person because they represent a kind of a type that is
Sure.
worth knowing, right?
And sometimes we pick somebody because they're especially fucked up.
Yeah, well, that's true too. And I think in this case, it's Nina Simone. It's all of the above. To be quite honest with you, so I think
I love it.
that's gonna
We
make
got a
it
full
interesting.
house here. We
Mhm.
got yeah. Okay, very good. I'm excited
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, we'll just kind of get into it. I mean, so first, why Nina Simone? Why is she worth talking about? Why are we going to spend several hours? Why did I spend all month just listening to every recording I could get my hands on, reading biographical materials? My primary sources are going to be Nina Simone's autobiography, "I Put a Spell on You," which was written with the help of a gentleman named Stephen Cleary. And then there's a number of Nina Simone biographies. The one that I ended up spending the most time with and drawing the most quotes from is this one, Nina Simone, The Biography, by a guy named David Brune Lambert. Quite good. There's also a documentary and a biography under the same name called "What Happened, Miss Simone." The documentary is quite good. We're going to go deeper than the documentary, but if you want a little more Nina, if you want to see a couple of the live performances, if you want to hear her voice, that's a good thing. It's on Netflix. It's definitely worth checking out. Um, but okay, so why talk about her? Here is a list of people who have, in an interview somewhere, said that Nina Simone was a significant influence on their work. Elton John, who actually named a piano after Nina Simone, Madonna, Aretha Franklin, Adele, David Bowie, Patti LaBelle, Boy George, Emile Sandy, Anthony and the Johnsons, Diana Reeves, Sade, Janis Joplin, Nick Cave, Van Morrison, Christina Aguilera, Elkie Brooks, Talib Kweli, Mos Def, Kanye West, Olivia Newton-John, Lena Horne, Bono, John Lennon, John Legend, sorry, Elizabeth Fraser, Cat Stevens, Anna Calvi, Cat Power, Licky Lee, Peter Gabriel, Justin Hayward, Maynard James Keenan, Cedric Bixler Zavala, Mary J. Blige, Michael Gira, Angela McCluskey, Lauryn Hill, Patrice Babatunde, Alicia Keys, Alex
Take a breath.
Turner. Yeah, right. It keeps going. John Lennon cited Nina Simone's version of "I Put a Spell on You" as an inspiration for the Beatles song "Michelle." And one of the reasons I want to cite that is not just for the number of people, but the range. I mean, you're talking about from Lauryn Hill to David Bowie, right? There's quite a range of people who she had a significant influence on. People of her own time and people who are making music now, equally in some cases influenced by Nina
Sure,
Simone.
and there's some 17-year-old spinning that up for the first time and having their minds blown.
Yes.
And saying, I have to do this. Right. I have to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What a beautiful thing, man.
For sure. Another reason to talk about Nina, super important culturally, not just as a musician, as an artist, super important sociopolitically. She was an enormous figure within the American civil rights movement. We're talking like James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, Stokely Carmichael, Nina Simone. These people all go in the same sentence. And we're gonna talk about that and how she fit and how she came into it, what her impact was there. Let me read a little thing from Toni Morrison talking about Nina Simone. And I think this will help us understand her influence and how important she was to at least some people, a lot of people. Quote, this is from the Nina Simone, the biography. Quote, the writer Toni Morrison, winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature and author of works devoted to the history of African Americans, asserted that Nina Simone, quote, was fundamental to me in my generation. I only met her a few times. She was indestructible, incorruptible. She even scared me a little. She would tell us to take up arms. She would tell us to forget about Martin Luther King and nonviolence, that it was time to follow the Black Panthers, to join the revolution. I had to confess to her that I wasn't ready to take up arms and that I'd rather take up my pen. She'd get mad. Base department. Yeah. I guess she wasn't ready to take up arms either because she channeled it all into her music. She was several women rolled into one. I loved her. There's really just one thing for me to say. Nina Simone saved our lives. So you can take that to mean whatever you want it to mean. We're gonna get into how she fit into the civil rights thing, but we're gonna talk about a lot of other stuff as well. And here's another thing. Here's another justification for her being on Art of Darkness and why she deserves a closer look. This is from her daughter, who she had a very troubled relationship with, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit. But here's a quote from Lisa Celeste. Go ahead.
If I may, it's starting to come back to me. I'm fairly sure I've seen like the major documentary about Nina Simone, but it's been so many years that it's kind of blended into other things. But cool. Okay, cool. All right. Quote from her daughter.
Yeah, from her daughter. Quote, my mother was one of the greatest entertainers of all time, hands down, but she paid a huge price. Okay. And that's kind of what we're going to explore, right?
Oh man, tell me about it.
Yeah.
It's real hard doing this podcast, man. I tell you what. No, listen, one of the things I love about being able to do a podcast is that we get to do it in our little hidey holes. We don't have to go out and actually be in front of people, because that is just like the psychic. Oh my God. And you're moving around and you're living in hotels and you're eating food that's not your own. And man, there's something about being at home.
Oh, we're gonna see how hard this ground down Nina Simone. Being Nina Simone was no picnic.
A full-time job.
Yeah. And it's because, it's easy to say, well, she was super successful and super influential. And she had this amazing career, and she did. And yet, like, think carefully about whether you'd want to trade places with her after this. Okay. So we'll get into the childhood stuff, just lay the groundwork. Nina Simone is born Eunice Wayman on February 21st, 1933 in Tryon, North Carolina, the sixth of 8 children and a fairly poor family in the small, kind of out in the woods almost, to be honest, on the slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains. She would die in 2003 in Carry-le-Rouet, France. And she'd be one of the most, as we said, one of the most influential recording artists of the 20th century, right? Grows up born in a shack, dies in France as celebrated, a celebrated artist, internationally celebrated artist. What people probably maybe don't know about Nina Simone, kind of casual listeners, because we think of her primarily as a singer, is that she was classically trained, and that term gets thrown around a lot now. I think anybody who's taken like a semester at a conservatory is now classically trained.
Yeah. I'm classically trained in podcasting.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
There was a little AV class that we took where we made a little radio show in junior high. I'm classically trained, Brad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. And, but for Nina, there were years, decades of her training, which was primarily self-inflicted, was almost life or death to her. And we're going to see how significant this was. She, well, we'll get to that. I mean, her first musical influence was Bach, right? It wasn't the spirituals. It wasn't maybe what you would think about a little girl born in North Carolina, a black girl born in North Carolina in 1933. She didn't have the same influences one might think she did. She gets to all that stuff eventually, but at first it's like Bach is her thing. So,
we got to get Brad a glass of milk. Bach, Bach. Oh, I'm getting ready to do my Hesse episode, and as I'm reading about it, I'm like, ooh, this is going to be fun. Oh, I think I know how to say that. I've kind of spent time in Switzerland, so okay, hopefully I can. Anyway, it's going to be
that fun. One's definitely better for you to do, at least on that front, if nothing else.
Indeed, yeah. Listen, Bach is potentially the greatest artist of all time by many people's estimation. And across races and classes, and everybody just kind of goes, that's it.
Yeah, and I say this as somebody who's relatively naive about music, to be perfectly honest. Mm-hmm. I mean, part of the reason I don't talk about a lot of musicians, I don't pick a lot of them as subjects for the show, is honestly my musical. I'm not that sophisticated musically, and so I respect Bach, but like I have no idea what he's doing. So, anyway, Nina, her mother.
I'll make sure Bach's people know.
Okay, yeah, let him know.
Next time I'm at Mass.
Yeah.
All right.
Nina's mother, Mary Kate Irvin, or Mary Kate Wayman, was born in 1902, and her grandmother, so Nina's great-grandmother, was half Irish from some plantation relationship, and Nina's great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee who'd married a slave. So we're not that far from slave times at all when Nina is born.
This stuff is Americana, only in America too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think on her mother's side, it's her great-grandmother. Nina's great-grandmother was a slave. And her great-grandfather was a slave. Right. Mary Kate, Nina's mother, grew up in a very religious family with 15 ministers, and Mary Kate would eventually become one as well, would become a Methodist minister as well. So highly religious family. Nina's father, a man named John Divine Wayman, named after St. John the Divine, author of the Book of Revelation, was born in 1899. Much less is known about his family, except that you go back a couple generations and they were all slaves. Before he met Mary Kate and got married, he was an entertainer himself. He would perform in a white suit, playing, piano and harmonica and various little events. At that time, they were in Pendleton, South Carolina. So he would play, little bar rooms and things like that. He gave it all up once he got married. They would get married in 1922. They had John, then Lucille, then the twins Carol and Harold. Harold caught spinal meningitis and would be paralyzed on one side for the rest of his life, which is scary. John, Nina's father, would work in a dry cleaning plant. He also had countless other jobs and enterprises during the years while his health was still good. He ran a truck haulage company in the North Carolina mountains. He cut hair. a bunch of other things. Um, Nino, now let me give you a little sense of, because this is going to be important as things come up. Let me give you a little sense of racially what Tryon, North Carolina was like. Okay, because this is the segregation era, and I know we have a bit of an international audience, and so we're gonna get into some of the details without trying to get too lost in it in the civil rights movement, what was going on, what was the context of all that. We'll try to get the high points, but in Nina's day as a child in the South, there were different facilities for Black people and for white people. On paper, the idea was sort of separate but equal. It was separate and basically never anything resembling equal.
Would have been almost impossible. It's an irrational proposition. Really.
It is. It doesn't make any sense.
It's just cope.
Yeah.
And I know you're in the middle of this, Brad, but I did want to say something, and it's that we love hearing from our audience, and we've reached a point now where every day, every couple of days, we hear from people. Brad and I are starting to be, people will ask us to write pieces now for outlets, which is very cool. I've got something that's going to come up in like January or February where it's nice for me because Werner Herzog is one of my heroes. He's still alive.
Yeah.
So I don't get to talk about him on the podcast, but I'm going to write about his new memoir and all of that. But really, if you're a listener and you want to connect with us, the Telegram's a good way to do it, t.me/artofdarkpod. But we also have an email address, artofdarkpod@gmail.com. We have season 4 mostly queued up. People want to kind of jump on us and say, hey, do these people. And when we hear from people, and you give us 3 or 4, it always goes into a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So it's never wasted. Right. But we take these correspondences very seriously. I love hearing from somebody in New Zealand. Hey, guys, what's going on? So really, if you want to reach out and touch faith, you can find us or you can email us at artofdarkpod@gmail.com. All right, Brad, back to there you go.
Yeah. Yep. So let me read us a little bit about what Tryon, North Carolina was like right around the time that Nina Simone was born. And this is from her autobiography. So this is kind of her voice, right? Quote, "It was the South and it was 1929, but as a resort town, Tryon had developed in an uncommon way. For instance, there wasn't a Black side of town. It was more like a series of circles around the center with Blacks or whites living in these circles. And a few Blacks, lived almost in the center, almost in the white areas. It was a checkerboard type of living with areas that were totally white and a few pockets of Blacks. The place existed mainly by taking care of the needs of visitors. So in their everyday lives, Black and white townspeople mixed together all the time. Tryon was laid out in a kind of L shape with one of the legs being the main street. That's where my father had his barber shop and dry cleaning business. Most of the customers for dry cleaning were white, but nearly all the customers for haircuts were Black. There was another barber shop a little way up the street where the white folks got their haircuts. The man who owned that place was also Black, although he could have passed for white and was regarded as a white man so long as he had a pair of scissors in his hand. He lived a little way up the street from my parents, a Black man outside of working hours. However, in the schools, hotels, restrooms, all the places people came into intimate contact, Tryon was like any other Southern town at that time, segregated." Okay, so just give you kind of the lay of the land of, where she kind of came up. She generally, as a child, didn't experience, and this is, I'm kind of paraphrasing her, as a child, she didn't really experience racism as such on a regular basis. It definitely became a factor later in her life, and we'll touch on that. But one thing I kind of wanted to paint a picture is somewhat naive, like all children are, child growing up and gradually becoming aware of their broader cultural context, right? And we'll see that happen to her over time. Okay, so John Devine, her father, had done actually a pretty good job of getting the family well established by the early 1930s. They had a big house. They had playground equipment in the yard. He's a respected member of the community. He's got a couple businesses going, doing pretty well for himself, to be honest, especially having a gang of kids, that's financially challenging, doing pretty well. And then 1929 hits. And, people, if you pay any attention to history, what happens in 1929, the Great Depression. And Tryon was a town that relied quite heavily on tourism, And those are the kinds of places that are the first hit when there's a major economic downturn, right? Basically, very quickly, Tryon becomes a ghost town, or almost like a ghost town, especially relative to how it had been. So they get through the Wayman family gets through the year 1932 by washing windows, sewing army uniforms in a national relief effort, driving government food to town to deliver it, growing a lot of food in their own garden. This is the way that a lot of people got by in the during the Great Depression, is just hooker by hook or by crook. Do a little bit of this, you do a little bit of that, you grow some food in the garden, you help out your neighbor, they help out you, that kind of thing. And then Nina was born, Eunice Kathleen Wayman. I'm going to read just a little bit from her biography, her autobiography. Quote, I was born at home at 6 a.m. On my birth certificate, Daddy listed his occupation as barber, although he hadn't been that for almost 2 years. Mama was down as a housewife, although she had been working right up to the week I was delivered. They still had their pride. I was christened Eunice Kathleen Wayman. 6 months after I was born, Daddy went off the NRA program because at last they had started to open up some of the hotels again. NRA, National Relief Effort, these things that the United States government put together to try and help people out during the Great Depression. Give you some work to do that's actually useful, but it's maybe funded by the government. Because he went off the NRA program because at last they had started to open up some of the hotels again. A lakeside camp had opened for business, and they took Daddy on as a cook. So again, we had a steady supply of food in our kitchen. Daddy thought he was out of the woods, and it would only be a question of time before our family would be up and moving. In the meantime, one way or another, he was making enough to feed all his family, including the new baby. That's Nina. Most of what I remember from the earliest part of my life is tied up with food and music. My first memory is of my mother singing. When she was around the house, she sang all the time in a high, trilling voice. She sang the same song she'd sing at Bible meetings, and they became the soundtrack to my infant life. I'll fly away, and if you pray right, or heaven belongs to me. While she barked, she would sit me up. While she baked, she would sit me up on the countertop and give me an empty jam jar to cut out the biscuit
Woof.
shapes in the dough, singing all the while. It seemed to me that she performed miracles every day. When the other children had gone out, she'd look down at me and say, Eunice, I don't know where I'm going to get dinner. We'd look around to see what there was in the kitchen, and she'd be right. There was nothing there. Dinner time would come around, and out would come what we called the Wayman specials: vinegar pie made with apple cider vinegar and dough, dumplings, chicken, or if the twins had picked in, blackberry. A lot of dumplings, always set down on the table with the same announcement: this stretches the meal. Rice pudding, brown Betty, beans, tons of beans. When all those beans that got on top of us, Mama would put sugar on them and create a whole new delicacy. We were
coming attractions, people. If we don't get our acts together, we're
right?
very, very fortunate right now.
Yeah, we were poor for a long time, but I can't remember ever going hungry. Not once. Mama made sure of that. Yeah. So they got by. By 1935, work was once again, and this thing, the economy kind of rises and falls. By 1935, she's 2 years old. Work is again and kind of has become somewhat scarce. Excuse me, again. And John Wayman falls ill. They realized they needed to downsize. They couldn't afford to live in the place that they were living in now, so they move into a shack outside of town. Mary Kate.
Wait. They're eating vinegar pie and beans, and they can't afford the place they have, and they got to downgrade from that.
Yeah, to a shack out in the woods. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Man.
It's rough.
Yeah, we talk about poverty now.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is poverty.
One of these
Capital P
places,
poverty.
I can't remember if it's this shack. It's the next shack that they live in. They have to move from one shack to the next.
Oh, the last shack on the left.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they moved to this shack, and then days later, her dad gets hospitalized because he has a blocked intestine and nearly kills him. They have to cut out a big section of his intestine.
Well, it's all the fucking dumplings in the.
Yeah, they're eating. I mean, they're eating.
Should have had more beans.
You need fiber, people.
You need fiber and protein and and greens, roughage.
Oh, when you're just starving, you don't.
No, of course not. You're not worried about. Right? Yeah. Is this keto?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I have I'm sorry, I can't eat apple
No,
pie, apple
I,
cider pie. I
I,
have a
I,
gluten allergy, and
no more vinegar pie for me, please. I'd like a steak.
yeah, can I get
Mother
a
just slaps her across the face.
who
I
taught
grew
you
up with
that
this.
word?
I grew up around, yeah, exactly. Who taught you the word steak? Yeah, no. And the people
Yeah.
who grew up with this generation too, the Depression era people, they were built different, man.
Oh,
They were
it's
not,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. The
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Depression era
Yeah.
grandparents generation who helped raise me, like they had a garden that was as big as like probably a 30-yard garden,
Yeah.
just the whole plot of land, and it was always going, and and they were always canning, and it's like, yo, it's 1992.
Right.
Like, they're like,
Right.
nope.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Boy, and
Yeah.
that food, but then I don't know if I'll ever taste green peppers. I mean, I'll have to go out of my way to find like, organic green peppers,
Right.
someone like literally fresh from the farm, like what you get now, like at the grocery store. It doesn't
Yeah.
have any taste. It doesn't have any
Right.
flavor.
It doesn't have any.
You know what I'm
A
talking
lot of
about.
it doesn't have as much
Doesn't have any
nutrition as you used to have. Yeah.
nutrients. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We're cooked. All right,
Yeah.
go on.
Yeah, so okay, so they move to this new shack. John Wayman falls ill, and it's pretty serious. They describe it. There's like when they cut the section out of his intestine, he has like a hole in his abdomen, and it needs to be cleaned like 10 times a day to keep it from getting infected. And Nina becomes his primary caregiver at 4 years old. 4 years old, she's like literally taking care of her dad all day long, cleaning his wound. She's making him a concoction because he can't eat anything. She's making him a concoction of eggs, carnation milk, and sugar, and helping him to drink it. And she's 4 years old, right?
He's slunking.
Right.
Dad's
He is
slunking.
slunking. Daddy was slunking. No.
Get him a Twitter account. They'll
Yeah.
start to monetize the shit out of that.
Yeah,
Yo,
that's
you gotta
right.
eat. You gotta be eating more eggs, bro.
Right.
20,000 followers. Just mysteriously a book deal. Have you considered eating eggs?
No, I hadn't thought about that.
Holy
Is it
shit!
good? Should
Well,
you eat
what a
eggs?
revelation. No, this is we're not subtweeting anyone in particular.
No,
There's a
no.
lot to be said for eggs.
There is for sure. It's good. There's a lot of good things in him. Now, here's the thing. He gets sick. This all happens right around the same time they moved into this new shack. That shack burns down. The only thing that they managed to save out of it is like this old pedal organ that who even knows where that thing came from. Their next house is worse yet. It was in the town of Lynn, and it was literally a shack out in the woods. They built an outside bathroom for it, and they were the first in Lynn, North Carolina to have an outside bathroom.
Okay, wait. You say outside bathroom. Are you talking plumbing or are we
I'm sorry.
talking
No,
outhouse
before this, before the Waymans got there, you just went and found a place to shit out in the woods.
based?
Yeah.
Yo, we had a disaster happen at our house this weekend.
Yeah.
We are having this reverse osmosis water filtration system, like this
Yeah.
Cadillac system installed in our basement. We got a notice from the city that there's like lead in the water, and I have a
Jesus.
pregnant woman
Yeah.
at home and babies, and I'm just like, okay, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. This seems like it's worth the money. They come to install it Friday afternoon. Pipe bursts upstairs, water half an inch thick in our bathroom, leaking into the kitchen. It wasn't they whatever. So there's like an emergency group who shows up and just like dehumidifies the shit out of the whole place. And so we've got this industrial equipment running all weekend, no running water all weekend. Right.
Fun.
So what I'm saying is I'm just like Nina Simone and her family shitting in the woods.
That's right.
I mean,
24 hours of inconvenience. It's exactly
right.
the
Yeah.
same.
72 hours. Right. And I'm looking at my family. I'm going, if we have to go, we'll go down to the gas station. And just the looks I'm getting, like I've somehow, and I didn't grow up in the most, we didn't have a lot of money, but like in any case, yeah.
Wow.
No, so they're the first ones who built themselves a shitter and an outhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. So
a Jake. Jake,
the Jakes, yeah. So you just
Jakes,
picture that. This is the living situation that
and they're like
it's
that,
rough.
and that's fancy. That's fancy.
Yeah, you have to imagine the other people in town are like, oh my god,
God, who do they think they are?
Right? Yeah, these snooty Waymans come in from out of town. Suddenly they got a hole in the ground to crap in.
It has a little moon on the door.
Right. It's charming.
Yeah,
wild, right? Now we gotta. So I just want to set that scene. This is where she comes from. I want to talk about the music aspect a little bit more at this point. So later in her career, she does this interview that goes along with the album she made live at Ronnie Scott's, and we'll talk about that more later because it's like at the end of her career. But the interviewer asks Simone something like, well, how did you get interested in music? And she said this, quote, I was born a child prodigy, darling. I was born a genius, which means that at 6 months old, my mom said that I knew what notes were on paper, and it scared her. At 3 years old, I remember a piano came to the house, and I remember playing a song, God be with you until we meet again, in the key of F. And of course, I didn't know what the key was. So I leave you for that to unscramble, she says. She would, when she was like an infant, church ladies would say she would clap along to the music, right? She was playing piano at literally 3 years old. You can't reach the pedals. You don't even, she can barely talk.
I'm not a big reincarnation person. I don't believe in reincarnation, and yet things like this, you have to go like, well, you could put it in the column of like, damn, man, was she Bach in a past life? Like, was she one of Bach's apprentices? I mean, who knows? But I mean, I don't believe in it per se, but I could see how somebody, if they were inclined, would go, there you go.
Right.
Because otherwise, how does it make sense? I mean, I guess it's like just a fluke of brain chemistry would be the sort of Reddit atheist way of looking at it.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing about being like musically inclined, but it's another thing like knowing how to play the instrument, right? It's one thing to be able to like say hum it or say it, but like actually the mechanical operations of the piano, it's like at this point nobody even taught her.
I think they see music the way that like you and I are seeing each other now over Zoom, and people see the show Art of Darkness. They like see the music. They can just sort of like associate the note with the placement of the fingers, and it just makes sense.
It makes sense to them somehow.
They're natural. They're natural. So call it a prodigy, call it a natural. Yeah. The way that I'm a natural podcaster.
Right. It's just, they say when you were 2 years old, you were doing reeds for Harry's Razors. Yeah.
Honest. I am having flashbacks to when I would force my friends, or if not my friends, the children in the neighborhood, would force them to, we would do little radio shows. So I remember that as a kid.
Really?
This was stuff that that's what I wanted to, and somewhere in the back of my brain anyway.
Interesting.
And here we are now.
Yeah. Okay. Let me read a little bit from the biography on this music thing again. Quote, still only small, Eunice had an ear for music. My mother told me, I already kind of gave you that part. But she does say this. My mother told me that when I was a baby, I only had to see an image, hear a radio advert of 2 or 3 notes of music, and I was off singing. It was in me. Music was in me. Her mother told her that she would raise herself on her arms and look around when she heard music playing. The ladies at church had been amazed to see the baby in her crib tapping to the rhythm of the hymns. Everyone agreed that it must surely be a divine manifestation. The village buzzed with rumors of the miracles that took place at the Wayman home. It was said that at age 2.5, the first time that Eunice touched the keyboard of the organ, she played the song I mentioned before. There's another part. Eunice was also compared to Mozart, and we think of his sister Nannerl, who at 11 was playing on the harpsichord or the piano the most difficult sonatas and concertos of the great masters, with the greatest of clarity, incredible ease, and the best of taste. The extraordinary experience of the 4-year-old Eunice opening Sunday services. So she's 4 years old and she's playing the piano to open service at the church. Was interpreted by the community as a divine manifestation. It should be remembered that this was a community in which Christian rituals evoked ancient spirits and magic. Had the grace of God filled this child, had a spirit possessed her body. These religious rituals were the fruit of, quote, intangible expressions of African culture, and the child had immersed herself in it well before discovering classical music. When she played on Sundays, the walls of the church trembled. The faithful came from far and wide, some more than 50 miles there and back, to hear the young prodigy. Right. So she's literally, people are coming down out of the hills to church on Sunday morning to hear a 4-year-old play the piano.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So
this doesn't surprise me for some reason. Hearing her music, you go, this is just there's a preternatural quality to it, which is not to take away anything from her.
No, I mean, of course.
Yeah, it feels like something that's coming from the beyond. Yeah, it's a gift. It's a gift.
Yeah. And like all gifts such as they are, there's a curse like
Torture,
aspect to them.
torturous, and also
Yeah.
like alienation, because nobody else is, very very few people are
Oh,
going to be able
she can't
to hang with her.
she can't relate to anybody she grows up with. She doesn't,
No,
and
right.
and this is the thing. So from the age of eh, this idea that she was the manifestation of the divine or something becomes a lot of pressure on her, and she takes it on board. So from the age of 6 to 12, she was putting in more efforts to get better at the piano than most adults have ever put into anything. It's the way I think about it. Just like go grinding at 6 years old, right? Understanding that there are levels to this,
Right.
knowing she can get better at it, and clearly
Wow.
enjoying it on some level too, right?
And obviously it all worked out, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no value judgment here, but God, I mean, the fates to place her in Tryon, North Carolina, and not on the Upper West Side, and
Right,
not in Paris or in Vienna.
right,
It's just gnarly. It's just so intense to think about.
right,
Yeah,
right.
she made it. She
She
made it.
did. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it could
and
easily,
and
and well,
clearly her community lifted her up, and they recognized it.
yeah.
That doesn't always happen.
Yeah, well,
So
this is
kudos
what
to them.
the community, what the community does is fascinating. This is actually the sort of the next part. So she has this period where she's performing. She performs at two church services on Sunday, rehearses with the choir on Fridays, plays for Wednesday night prayer meetings, and attends and performs at as many holiness revival events as she could. And then at home, she practices on the organ. So this is, you're talking to a kid who's playing 3, 4, 5 hours a day at 6 and 7 years old, most of it self-motivated. Now her mother, in addition to being a minister, did white housekeeping for white families. One of these clients was this woman named Mrs. Miller, and Mrs. Miller realized it was a shame that Nina didn't have like actual training, right? We need to do something with this girl, right? You can't just let her play in the church every Sunday and clap and then we all say that was great. We need to actually do something with this. So she says that she will pay for Nina to get 1 year of tuition with a piano teacher that she knows. And if that works out, if that seems good and she's continuing to develop, we'll figure out a way to continue that tutelage after that year. So this is when Nina gets introduced to a woman named Muriel Masinovich. And Miss Mazzy was a refined English woman who lived in Tryon for who knows why. And she was married to a reasonably successful artist and talented pianist. And so around 6 years old, Nina starts going over to Miss Mazzy's house, as she calls her. She would walk 2 miles there, 2 miles back, cross the railroad tracks, as it were. She would stop at Owen's drugstore and get a sandwich, but she was not, because she was a little black girl, she was not allowed to eat in the drugstore like everybody else. She had to go stand on the curb and eat her cheese sandwich.
That stuff is
Um,
so sad.
isn't it?
It's
Like
just sad.
it's like she's
She's
a
like a genius. She's like a generational genius, and
right.
because
And you
of
can't
her
just let her,
black
you
skin,
can't
she can't just, like, little girl can't hang. I mean, yeah, whatever. Yeah,
right,
no. I
right.
mean, good
Yeah.
riddance. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so Nina ends up loving Miss Mazzy. Miss Mazzy is like her surrogate. I don't know if that's the word. It's like her second mother. Miss Mazzy is wonderful and trying to teach her as much as she could. Um, let me give you a little bit on Miss Mazzy from the bio.
Ms. Mazzy
Ms. Mazzy and
in
Nina would,
Tryon, North Carolina.
yeah, Nina would love Ms. Mazzy for life. It's like decades later she'd go back to Tryon just to see Miss Mazzy.
Oh, I love
Um,
it.
yeah.
As you read, I'm going to stand up and get more jet fuel, but I
Okay.
am
Yeah.
listening. All right. I
Yeah.
hope
Okay.
everybody's enjoying this. We love doing these core episodes. I can already tell this is a banger. Brad has
Mhm.
crushed it. Brad has put in the work. You know what? Before you read what you're going to read, Brad,
Yeah.
pitch what is coming for After Dark for
Oh,
Patreon.
yes. Yeah, good. Thanks for the reminder. So we got a couple of things. We're going to really cover three major things in the After Dark. After Dark is for our beloved Patreon supporters. We do an extra 20 to 30 minutes bonus content just for you guys. And we like to say something. We like to save something particularly interesting for that. We're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about the possible spooky relationship that Nina Simone had with a big black dog. And I'm not talking about an actual dog. I'm talking about the black dog of English folklore. So that's an interesting story. We're also going to talk about this psychiatric medication she went on in the late 80s and the effect it may or may not have had on her. And we're going to talk about a time in the early 90s when Nina Simone's violence finally got out of control. Like, she should have gone to prison and didn't.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
No. Whoa.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about
Okay.
that.
Well, this black dog, that's probably why you were talking about, you had the Freudian slip about barking. Okay, good. So this is going to be good. So, yeah. And, you gave the pitch. We always do a, bonus time for Patreon, patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We appreciate all our existing supporters. Get on board if you haven't. We love you guys. We want to keep doing this show for a very, very, very long time. The material support makes all the difference. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. If you do not want to use Patreon, you can use PayPal. You can do a one-time. You can leave a note in there and say, hey, I really appreciated the Nina Simone episode. You just go to artofdarkpod.com. There's a PayPal link. You can't miss it. Awesome. All right.
Cool. Yeah.
Bring us back.
So yeah, this is from the biography. Excuse me. Quote, during her lessons with Mazzy, Nina learned classical music's equivalent of algebra, solfeggio. She learned to decipher musical scores, to read and write music, understand the rhythms and sing a tune, the role of the right hand, which played themes and melodies, and the left, usually focused on rhythm and harmonies. The child learned all of that with ease, so her teacher allowed her to skip a few stages in her tuition. She taught her easy pieces, introduced her to a few composers, woke her up to Mozart, and had her learn a few of his early works. Then she introduced her to Liszt, Czerny, and most importantly, Bach. She immersed the child in his two-part inventions, his fugues and contrapuntal writing, which later on she would basically introduce counterpoint and fugue into jazz phrasing, which is kind of interesting. Miss Mazzy made her study the preludes, then later the art of fugue, the toccatas, etc. Through Bach, Nina rediscovered emotions that she'd already felt in church and that reached beyond music alone. Nothing in the nuances she deciphered could explain how she felt. It was as though a higher force flowed from the harmonies she played, like some kind of presence, a gateway to a sacred dimension. And then this is Nina's words. Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. It is. This is Nina's words. Once I understood Bach's music, I never wanted to be anything other than a concert pianist. Bach made me dedicate my life to music. And so after this, Nina at some point makes a decision, partially from the influence of her mother, that she is going to be the first Black classical pianist to perform at Carnegie Hall. That's her goal. Literally, like, after she has hit records, that's still her goal. It's like, this is all noise. What I want to master is Bach and Mozart. That's what she wants to be doing. So we'll see how we'll keep track of that as time goes on here.
Well, no doubt she played Carnegie Hall. She must have done, many times.
Yeah, we'll talk about what happened at Carnegie Hall. She definitely made it to Carnegie Hall, and
well, this is what I always say when I tell people that we're expecting a child, and I always say, and we have 3-4 kids, and then I always say, how you get to Carnegie Hall?
Yeah,
practice. That's my joke. It usually gets a laugh.
Yeah. Now, the year comes to an end at which Mrs. Miller was going to pay for this tuition. So, this is quite a good thing. They're trying to help, but, we got to be realistic here. So what are we going to do? Well, Miss Mazzy and Mrs. Miller, they set up the Eunice Waymond Fund to collect money from the community to further Nina's education. All the churches in the Tryon area took up collections, and there were donations from all walks of life. They wanted to, the entire community, particularly the Black community, but not only the Black community of Tryon, was putting a lot of faith in Nina and frankly, a lot of pressure. They would, in sort of return for this fund that they were building up, which at this time was just paying for the tuition to study with Ms. Mazzy, but would later finance other things. Nina was asked to play a recital, and here we get a sort of a legend of Nina's life, her first real encounter with in your face, racism that she really onboarded. The one thing about segregation, I think in Nina's case, at least, and I've never lived through it, so I don't want to, have too strong of an opinion, but I think Nina, the sort of everyday segregation just felt like how things were, and she didn't take it personally necessarily. But when she's either 11 or 12, she puts on a recital at the I think it's the public library, and her parents come. Her parents sit in the front row, and then some other people come along and try and tell her parents that they have to sit in the back, right? It's
Yeah,
her.
get wrecked.
Right,
Get
exactly.
wrecked.
And Nina, 11 years old, stands up and she said, "You put them back in the front, or I'm not playing." And that's
Based.
emblematic of her whole vibe. She's like,
Yeah.
"I'm up here. I'm in charge."
Right.
I'm 11
I
years
am
old,
in
but
the front. I am
right,
driving this bus.
right. So if I want them to sit in the front, they're going to sit in the front. Like, and I'll just walk away. I'll throw it all away. I don't get, and it's awesome, frankly. And
That is an awesome scene.
this is her vibe.
That is like made for the biopic.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Um, okay. So that happens. She's continuing this education. She continues working with Ms. Mazzy for a while. Now, 13 years old, it's time to go to high school. One thing I guess we should know, we did kind of say it. This level of dedication to music, as a child, she had few, if any, friends. And when she did have friends that she played with, most of the time they just tried to get her to like play the piano or sing. Like she became sort of a novelty to the other children.
A wind up toy.
Right. And so she wasn't intimate with anybody, and she's kind of lonely. She's got a lot of siblings, but even them she doesn't relate to particularly well. Now she so
It's like she could see Bach in her mind.
Yeah.
She can understand Bach, and then like, let's go play tag.
Right. It's rough, right? It's hard to relate to those kids. And she had pictures of Bach hanging up in her bedroom. Like another kid would have an athlete or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, she had pictures of Mozart and Bach, and she considered them her best friends as a child.
That is wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so they end up sending her to Allen High School for Girls in Asheville, North Carolina. She actually liked
That's a good school.
Apparently, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know a whole lot about it. She apparently liked it, was fairly disciplined, and she actually apparently really liked the discipline. She did start to make a few friends. But she got up every morning while she was in high school on her own. She does this. She gets up every morning at 4 a.m. to practice for a few hours before school starts. Right. So just like literally 13 years old, you're getting up at 4 to play the piano because you got to get it in before this BS of school starts. Right. She had a boyfriend in high school, this guy named Edney, who was a Native American boy. Might have really been the only guy that she actually loved. And we'll see how unlucky in love Nina is throughout her life. She graduates at the head of her. So she basically, high school she has this one romantic relationship with this boy, Edney, practice piano every day. She graduates at the head of her class at this high school. She's the number one student. And literally there's a newspaper article in Asheville newspaper about child prodigy is the valedictorian of her high school. Right. So this is the kind of, she's a little bit of a freak, to be honest.
Get her to Harvard, man.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Just punch the ticket, send her to Eastman or Juilliard would be
right. Well, this is what happens. So she goes right after high school. She attends a summer session at Juilliard. She would later say that she went for an entire year, but she spends a summer session at Juilliard.
That too is a good school.
That is a good school. And I think it was a good experience for her, but you have to remember she's from a small town, North Carolina, and she went up to live in Harlem for a summer by herself. It was she was kind of old. 17, 16.
What
she
year?
Never left 1950.
Man, she's hopping the A train, man. Whatever. Yeah, I did that. I did that for a long time.
Yeah.
That's partly where my obsession with protein comes from, because you can't really get any good protein in New York unless you're ultra wealthy.
Right.
So now back in Minnesota, man, I
stab a homeless guy in an alley.
It's what?
That's how you get protein.
Oh my God. That's why Brad's always keep him in Michigan, man.
This is why I don't live in New York.
Werewolf in Michigan.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm sorry. This is a bit of an anecdote, but last night I was talking with my lady about I posted something about my least favorite Christmas song being the little drummer boy. And
Okay.
I realized last night why it's my least favorite. Nobody wants to think about nativity, baby Jesus in the manger, and then this little waif shows up with a fucking drum. That is not my vision. And he's like, you get this like fucking Ringo wannabe starts hammering away, and the Virgin Mary is like, yo, I mean, she's just given birth to God.
Can we knock it off with the drums for a second?
Maybe I mean, imagine, you know, your lady is just given birth, and some little homeless boy shows up with a drum. I mean, it's horrible. And of course, it's not a tradition. It was, get out of here, kid. You and your drum. You know, it was written in like 1941. But then she's like, well, what's your favorite? What's your favorite Christmas song?
Good question.
I said Rudolph because he gets his revenge.
Well, that is the spirit of Christmas. Yeah.
And we just cracked up for 10 minutes. She's like, you're so cynical. Oh my God. I'm like, no, he does. He shows up all the reindeer. Yeah. And she's like, that's not what that's
the hero story.
That's not what that song is about. Anyway, what's your just just for the record, for the Art of Darkness listeners, what is your least favorite Christmas song, Brad?
Oh, you know what's funny is it's the
oh, is it the Beatles one?
It's the Beatles one with
everybody hates
with
that
the
one.
synth. Oh God, but it's an earworm. If I hear it once, it is in my head for a month straight.
I heard a cover of that shit today.
Why would you cover it?
Why would you cover it? Why would you perpetuate this into the world?
Taking the lid off of, like, you know.
Yeah, literal demons.
Just leave it. Just leave it. Leave it alone.
And I'm a Beatles fan. I'm prepping Hessen. I'm prepping John Lennon.
Yeah. So, I'm not one of these people who thinks the Beatles are overrated. I mean, it's
sure. No,
amazing,
I mean, you can't rate them highly enough.
Doesn't mean that they didn't.
Well, and what's your
clunkers?
Obla da. What's your favorite Christmas song? Brad?
Oh, that's tricky. I honestly, you know, maybe it's a little trite. Silent Night.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I mean, I grew up going
to
Catholic Mass Christmas. They bust out the Silent Night, and it was always, you know, it was one.
That's what I mean. And then the little drummer boy shows up and fucks it up.
Shut up, kid.
At least take some lessons. All right, back to the great Nina Simone.
Okay, so after Juilliard, the idea is that she's going to go. Oh, by the way, the Eunice Wayman Fund paid for her to go to Juilliard. So this little town decided that this little girl, forget segregation, forget all this stuff. We're going to try and make something happen in this little girl's life. She's too talented to be ignored. So after this little stint at Juilliard, the idea is that she's going to go to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, also a good school. It's a renowned, you know, this is a renowned private music conservatory. It's one of like the top 3 or 4 in the country, apparently.
Yeah, it would be Juilliard, Eastman, and then I think I've heard of this one too.
Curtis. Yeah, it's
probably like 5 or 6. Yeah.
So, and it seemed like she was going to get in, right? All signs kind of pointed towards it, and the Waymans were so convinced that she was going to get in that the whole family moves to Philadelphia. And, you know, okay, so she doesn't get in. She's one of 75 pianists to try out that year. 3 are accepted. She plays Bach, Mozart, Rachmaninoff. She played splendidly. She doesn't get in. Let me read a little bit about this. This is again from the biography. Quote, Sylvia Hampton, her English biographer, thinks that until the Curtis defeat, Nina had been sheltered from racism by the love of her family and the support of the Tryon community. I mean, you do have to think, like, it's hard to develop a perspective on the world that racism is a problem when your entire town is like rooting for your every move, right? Even if there are like things here and there, it's kind of hard to feel like, oh, I'm being, you know, held down by the system.
And this kind of cuts against maybe some of our impression about the way that it was. I mean, it was, I don't want to run cover for the way it was, right. But I think that people have this, it's very, very cut and dry, and it was just pure evil, and right. It's muddy. There's muddy. Right. And I'm not a Southerner, and neither are you. So
right.
There we go.
Yeah. The curtain, when she got rejected by Curtis, the curtain had suddenly dropped. This overprotected young girl now had to accept her failure and submit to a life no one had prepared her for. Anonymity and slavery in disguise. The failure was made public, spread through the streets of Philadelphia, and within a few hours reached Tryon and the Good Samaritans of the Eunice Wayman Fund. At that precise moment, the special bond between mother and daughter was stretched beyond repair. Mary Kate, Nina's mother, couldn't stand watching her pace around the house looking for a solution that didn't exist. She would never forgive her. What good were all those prayers if the only reward was this slap in the face? And how could she get her revenge now for her family, for her, and for her race? From that day on, regardless of the way the young pianist's life turned out, whether or not she achieved her goals or found a job, like her mother had demanded of her, nothing could ever erase this scar. And from that moment, Eunice and Mary Kate lost one another for good, neither of them proving capable of alleviating the other's disappointment. So the whole family had put all this weight on Nina's going to be the thing. And Curtis rejects her, and they don't really know how to handle it, to be honest. And it kind of disrupts the family. And pretty soon, they'd all moved to Philadelphia for this to happen. Now let me read another little bit, because there's one thing. Nina felt that she was rejected for her rate because she was black, but that could be the case. I mean, we're not in the heads of the people who are making this decision. On the other hand, there's 75 pianists who tried out and 3 made it. It's not very good odds for anybody. It's like a percentage, like 1% of people are getting in or something like that. So it's hard to say. But let me read this little bit. Well, actually, is that what I want to read? Okay. Sorry. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. That's why I'm in the wrong book. Now she's in Philadelphia. She gets rejected by Curtis, but she has money left in the Eunice Wayman Fund. So basically what she does is she starts paying for private sessions with the same teacher she would have had she gone to Curtis. So in a way, she set up her own Curtis Institute of Music, essentially, using this money from Tryon. Now, there's a little bit about, after a couple lessons, Professor Sokolov, this guy Vladimir Sokolov, who's her teacher, said I really should have been a scholarship student, and at last I knew for sure how good I was. So she does restore a bit of enthusiasm for the piano after this, and she's working with this guy, and he, according to Nina, he says you should have got it. Now, interestingly enough, just days before Nina Simone dies in 2003, the Curtis Institute of Music gives her a degree. They tried to make up for it.
Just like Rudolph, she got her revenge. She's at the front of the sleigh. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And if you don't think we've done how many core episodes now, Brad? I've lost
60
count.
In the 60s somewhere.
Quite a few. And so we've thought a lot about artists and their so-called dark side, and all the rest of it. A lot of people are motivated by spite and revenge, a desire to I will show them.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's a fuel. And the thing is, you can channel. It's a thing just like anything. You can channel it and use it to be productive and do things, or you can just let it fucking destroy you, right? She could have just spent the next 30 years pacing around Philadelphia saying, oh, poor me, this thing happened to me.
Absolutely. Or you can do both, like John Berryman.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good point. Now, so she's got these lessons with Vladimir Sokolov. She also starts working for a vocal coach. So she starts playing the piano at basically a singing school. It's just kind of a storefront thing. It's not anything like Curtis Institute. This is like teenagers who can't sing want to be singers, right? And they go to this, and Nina plays the piano. She gets good enough at this that she decides to start doing it on her own. So she's 18 years old, and she has a storefront music school basically that she has built up on her own, which is pretty awesome. Even if it wasn't like super financially successful, I mean, that's to me is like a very entrepreneurial and very like motivated thing to do. Like, oh, I could go work in a grocery store or something, or I could like literally start a business based on the one thing I know how to do. It's pretty awesome. Now, at this time, she also spends some of her money going to a therapist. So she realizes that there's something not quite right with how old Nina's brain works. And so more of that's going to come up later. But
women will literally go to a therapist rather than let their demons destroy them.
That's pretty good.
Women be doing therapy.
That's pretty good. That's pretty. You should tweet that. Now, so she starts this school, and at some point one of her students tells her, yeah, I'm not gonna take lessons with you anymore. I'm going down to Atlantic City to play in a bar for the summer. And Nina's like, but you're a terrible singer and an even worse piano player. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's Atlantic City.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So she looks into this. Yeah.
I want to hear about this, but if you want to know where Hell on Earth is the Greyhound station at Atlantic City.
God. Oh, I've been in a lot of Greyhounds, and that one's got to be. I've never been in that one particularly, but I can picture it.
It is the bottom of the toilet of the West. It's just horrific. It's horror. Don't ask how I ended up there.
Yeah. So, okay. So Nina goes down there and she gets a gig playing at a bar in Atlantic City. This is the summer of, I want to say 1954, I think.
Wow. I mean, if you could teleport back to like 1954 Atlantic City, I'm sure it's very, very different from the way it is now. And boy, that would be something to see, the boardwalk and the buildings and what it must have been like. It must have been very, very, very different.
It still fit a lot of the same like rule. It was still like the vacation spot where for like the Eastern
New York and Philly.
Yeah, if you weren't going to go to Florida.
Half of Philly empties out on Friday afternoon and goes to Atlantic City, and that's where they go and spin the old roulette wheel.
Now
they have you stay there and they have safety checks if you're staying alone.
Oh my God, is that right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Jeez. Is that to make sure what you're not getting raped or you're not committing suicide or what?
Yes.
A little bit of all this. Yeah. Whew. Okay. That's crazy. I've never been to Atlantic City. It's the one I've been a lot of places in the United States. That's one place I never ended up.
You can have a good time in Atlantic City. You just have to know where to stay and just keep an eye on your wallet.
Yeah, got to be able to hold your liquor. That's all.
Yeah. Oh boy, yeah. Let me tell you, the cocktail waitresses in Atlantic City. That is, I mean, if you could just do a podcast interviewing those ladies, that would be. I would listen to that show.
That seems like
that seems like they got some stories.
That seems like that's like the grizzled veterans of the service industry. That's like talking to
they've seen it all.
Yeah. Okay, this is about Nina playing in a bar. Quote, in Atlantic City. Quote, up to that moment, I had never been into a bar in my entire life. I pushed the door open. First time you go into a bar, you play for the crowd. Like, what a weird, what do you know about what these people want or who they are, I pushed the door open and my eyes watered from the smoke and my nose twitched as the smell of the place hit me. I walked up to the bar and I asked if I could please speak to Harry Stewart, the owner. The barman asked what I wanted and I said I was the new pianist. He said Harry was a little tied up. Would I wait? I said yes. He asked if I wanted a drink and I asked for a glass of milk. A few of the old Irish guys around the bar laughed and I blushed. I looked around out of the corner of my eye. The Midtown, this bar, was just one long room with the bar stretching 2/3 of the way down one wall. Some tables and chairs were laid out in the remaining space, and a piano stood on a tiny raised stage at the back. I reckoned the entire place could hold about 100 people if you greased each one and slid them in sideways. There was a door by the end of the bar, and behind that was a room where they put the drunks to sleep it off when they'd had too much to make it home. There was sawdust on the floor. It was a joint. No other word for it. At least no decent word for it. Harry Stewart came out from his room at the back. He was a little Jewish guy and had a fat cigar in his mouth as a permanent fixture. He took me up to look at the piano, which was okay. And in the roof above the keyboard, exactly over where I would sit, was a leaky air conditioning machine, water dripping down on the piano stool. Harry went into his office and came out a moment later with a black umbrella, which he opened up and jammed into the ceiling by the air conditioner so that the water dribbled down the side of the umbrella and fell in a little pool. The guys at the bar must have thought I was from another planet when I walked in that night. The only public performances I had ever given were classical recitals, and all my training and presentation was for the concert stage. Miss Mazzy had taught her how to bow, what to wear, how to act, all of the mannerisms of being a classical pianist. And now she's performing in some crappy joint in Atlantic City for a bunch of drunks. quote, I decided that whatever they might think of me, I was probably the finest pianist they'd ever hear, so I was going to present myself as such. When it came to actually playing, I would get through it by closing my eyes and pretending I was somewhere else, like Carnegie Hall or the Metropolitan Opera. So I put on my best long chiffon gown, fixed my makeup and hair just like I always did, and went to work. Nobody said anything when I walked in, but they all turned to look at me. Harry's cigar almost went out. I sat on stage a diva, a professional entertainer for the first time, and played to an audience of drunken Irish bums. The deal was I performed from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. with a break of 15 minutes every hour. For that, I got $90 a week plus tips and as much milk as I could drink. That first night the only thing I wasn't nervous about was what to play. I knew hundreds of popular songs and dozens of classical pieces. So what I did was combine them. I arrived prepared with classical pieces, hymns, and gospel songs and improvised on those, occasionally slipping in a part from a popular tune. Each song, which isn't really the right way to describe what I was playing, lasted anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes. I just sat down, closed my eyes, and drifted away on the music. The first night she performed, she didn't sing at all. And Harry Stewart, the owner, afterwards said, that was really good, but if you don't sing, you're fired. And that's how Nina became a singer. It was the fact that, like, that was
Got to
the
sing
job.
for your supper.
Right.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah. She didn't sing before that.
This is an incredible story.
Isn't it? Right?
It's amazing that there has not been a biopic.
Yeah. Well, there has.
Oh, has there?
It's not good.
Oh, well, so it's amazing there has not been a biopic.
A good one. Yeah. Yeah. And so she begins to draw a crowd at this place. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time, but there's Atlantic City's bustling in the summer. And so eventually this becomes one of the things to do in Atlantic City. We're going to go see this very strange, extremely talented, pretty black girl play music in a way we've never really heard before. It becomes a thing. Now, this is also the same time that Nina chooses her stage name. Because
you're not going to go up there and be like, I'm Eunice
Wayman. Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't work.
The reason that she picks her stage name is because she did not want her mother to find out she was playing in nightclubs. Her mother is super religious, and her mother thinks this is music of the devil. Like, you might as well be having premarital.
I mean, look around. Look around. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe it is.
Not 100% wrong.
Yeah. It's like anything else. It's a spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obla di obla da.
Yeah.
Music of the devil.
Right.
We're always having a wonderful Christmas time.
Yeah.
Music of the devil.
Right. Weird.
Little drummer boy.
Yeah.
Music of the devil.
Okay.
Rudolph.
Yeah.
That's God's own tune, buddy. That's the Old Testament God.
That's right. There's a hilarious bit for people just on this. We're thinking we're in a Christmas mode. If you're listening to this some other time, it's December 17th here. There's a great part in Trailer Park Boys where it becomes obvious that Ricky, one of the main characters, doesn't know the difference between Santa and God. He thinks it's the same guy. That's really funny.
That is funny.
Yeah. Okay, so Nina Simone, why did she pick the name Nina Simone? Well, one, she'd gone on a couple dates with a Mexican boy that called her Nina, right, for little. And she took the Nina from that, and she took Simone from Simone Signoret, a French actress. That's all it is. She thought it sounded good when you put it together. Now, over this time playing at the Midtown Bar in Atlantic City, people might be familiar, making another Beatles reference, people might be familiar with the time that the Beatles spent in I think it was called the Cavern, that bar that they played hours and hours and hours and hours in
Frankfurt.
In Frankfurt, yeah. And people attribute that constant playing to one of the reasons they became so productive and so good later, right? Well, Nina Simone had already done her 10,000.
I know it wasn't Frankfurt. Was it Hamburg? I think it was Hamburg.
I'm not sure. It was in Germany someplace. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she'd already done her 10,000 hours classically. Now she's doing her 10,000 hours in front of a sort of a general audience. So it's literally, like I said, 7 hours a night, 6 nights a week for the entire summer.
Yeah, and that's where that algebraic understanding of music comes into play, because it's like,
Hmm.
well, what's the mood of the crowd? Where's
Right,
everybody at right now?
right,
How do I stretch this out? I gotta
right,
take this number and make it 12 minutes. And where do
right.
I take my breaks? And
Right. And her
yeah.
sophistication and her musical brain, it wasn't going to allow her to just crank out pop tunes. Just like I'm going to play a pop tune, a pop tune, a pop tune. Like just she had to, and we see this later in her career. All of her most popular songs are not songs that she wrote. They're songs that became she turned them into Nina Simone productions, right?
Mm.
Through rearrangement. One of her accompanists would call it metamorphizing. She would change them into Nina Simone songs. Those are her best. All the best hits of hers were not written by her generally. Um, okay, so she does this. She does this. She works in the Atlantic City bars, 1954. After the summer's over, she goes home. She starts teaching her students again. She continues her lessons with Vladimir Sokolov. She doesn't even tell anybody that she's doing this in the summer, right? She doesn't want her family to know. They think she's going down there, and I don't know what they thought she was doing, but apparently this was not on their radar. Um, she does this the summer of 1955, and by the summer of 1955 she is a fixture. There are people coming that will come every night to see her in Atlantic City, mostly white, a lot of beatniks, right? Because this is the mid 1950s, so it's a lot of beatniks. One of these people, and some of them become kind of her friends, and it's not a huge bar, and there's people showing up every night. You're having a smoke. You become friendly with these people over the course of the summer. One of these people who becomes her friends is this white beatnik guy named Ted Axelrod. He suggests that Nina play the song I Loves You Porgy from George Gershwin's 1935 opera Porgy and Bess. She plays it for the first time with no rehearsal in front of the nightclub audience, and they lose their minds over it, which is funny to me because I've listened to like everything you can listen to by Nina Simone, and it's personally one of my least favorite song recordings of her, but they loved it. So
They
whatever.
love it. I mean, but that was a
Yeah,
hit musical. That was a big
it
deal.
was. Yeah.
And I'm not an historian of musical theater, although I am presently writing a musical. I'm writing
Yeah.
a musical about the Killdozer incident. It's called
Hmm.
Killdozer, an unreasonable musical, and it's going to be a lot of
Wonderful.
fun. But that's
Yeah.
another story.
Mhm.
But that was a huge hit. It's incredible how easy those songs are for somebody who can play Bach. They're
Right.
like little nursery rhymes almost, but that's what people want. They want
Right.
those basic chord changes and the thing you can kind of sing along with in the very root of, to
Yeah.
this day, nothing has changed. I mean,
It
pop
took
music is pop music.
it took Nina a while to respect the fact that that's what audiences wanted. I think she spent a lot of time in the early years, especially, and to a certain degree throughout, sort of having a certain degree of contempt for her audiences because again, she's like, I'm a fucking genius, and you want me to play I Loves You Porgy? You want me to go din 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 for
Freebird.
4 hours? Like, really? That's what you want? You're like, do you know what I can do? Like, so
Wow.
yeah.
Is she, how old is she roughly right here now? Is
Well,
she
1955, she would have been 22 years old, so she's young.
okay? All
Yeah,
right. She
yeah.
started to have some pops. She's starting to drink,
Yeah.
probably.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. She does start to drink in this bar in this, and she would have struggles with alcohol later. It's not really a problem quite yet, because she's still fairly focused. But
It do be like that
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
Hmm.
It's 1956, her third summer in Atlantic City. She's a celebrity, a niche micro celebrity of Atlantic City, right? She's got friends, she's got renown. She goes back to Philadelphia. At first she's thinking, well, she'll start up teaching her students again, and then she kind of has this moment where she's like, well, I'm successful. Like, why would I pretend I'm not this thing anymore, right? And she just decides, I'm not going to teach anymore. I'm going to find a way to play clubs in Philadelphia year round. She tells her family that she's performing in clubs. Her mother hates this. Her mother would really almost never respect what Nina does. It doesn't matter until literally decades later, that Nina, the level of talent and the audience and what Nina thinks that she's doing positive in the world, none of it actually seems to matter for a long time. Which, by the way, doesn't stop Nina's mother from spending the money that Nina sends, or Nina sends money basically her whole life to her family, which good on her, but her mother could show her a little affection in return. She never really does.
Do you
And
know how is she getting paid? I mean, is she being paid by the club and
mhm.
probably tips in the jar or something like
Yeah,
that?
I
And
think she had it was like in Atlantic City anyway, it was like a paid residency. So you're almost like staff. And I'm sure there were tips on top of that. She was getting paid $90 a week to do, I think, like 6 nights of
yeah,
performance. Yeah.
yeah, that rocks. Live music
Yeah.
is the very best thing in the world. It's
Man.
so good. When it's
Yeah.
good, it's just the best damn
Well,
thing.
it
And it
and
should we should be more of it.
yeah,
We
and could you imagine what I like to picture is just being a normie walking around Atlantic City in the 50s. You
you
walk
don't
into this
walk or
bar,
you stumble. You
he's
stumble,
stumbling
Brad.
around, and you stumble into this bar, and this sort of very she and for people who look up a picture of Nina Simone. She's a striking looking person. And the drugs and the stress kind of deteriorate her physically as they do anybody, but like she's a striking looking person. And you
Mhm.
imagine you walk into this dimly lit bar, it's smoky, this striking looking, very young, beautiful woman is playing the wildest music you've ever heard. That's like, it feels like a dream. These pop, classical, jazz, fusion, like, and she's got her eyes closed, and she's just in a trance playing this. It would be quite a remarkable thing to stumble into. Um, okay. Now,
You really paint a picture, Brad. You should
good.
do a show.
I should. I should do a show. I should think about that. I'll change my name so my parents don't think I'm a sinner. Uh,
Bradley,
maybe I
Bradley
maybe I already have.
Kalinowski.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Kalinowski.
Yeah, make it Irish or make it Polish. Uh okay.
The
So
worst nom de plume of
just
all
making it
time.
worse somehow.
Oh boy.
uh, so she starts playing Philadelphia clubs. This actually goes about as well as it went in Atlantic City, right? People like her. So she's starting to make friends. And this is one thing about Nina. She's very lonely, right? And she's not even necessarily a person who handles being lonely very well. She wants people around and she wants them to love her, frankly. She wants somebody to come up and tell her, Nina, you're amazing, right? Which, that feels good if it ever happens. She ends up marrying this guy who's the worst match ever. This guy, Don Ross, he's like a quasi beatnik painter dude, but he's really pretty much just like smoking weed and hanging out in his living room listening to records. His It's not really a whole lot to say about him, except it's indicative of her bad taste in men, frankly. And we're gonna see this play out. Um, she'll she'll kind of glom onto any guy who's there in a way, like anybody who's sort of forthright in their attention towards her, she will gravitate to it. And that you can imagine why that might be a problem for somebody who's like becomes a public figure. Um, she meets her first competent player that she can play with. So at first she's just playing by herself. She gets introduced to this guy Al Shackman, who she would actually play on off and on with until the 90s. She would describe playing with him as a telepathic experience, and he would say the same thing about her. And it's funny, he's like, you put them next to each other, it's different as two human beings can look. which is wonderful in a way,
Now was
yeah.
Al Shackman of the Philadelphia Shackmans?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Is that a family? Is that a thing?
No,
um,
the surname is literally Shackman.
yeah.
I highly doubt that. I'm gonna look him up.
Yeah. You go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
SCHA. Yeah. Yeah.
CKMAN.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alan Shackman. Cool.
Yep.
What was his? Did he play? He
A
played
guitar.
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 Oh
Yep.
wow, wow! Look
Yeah.
at this guy. You're right. I mean, he and that's so cool. And there are pictures of him with Nina. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. They played together for years and years and years and years.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Around this time, the mid to late 50s in Philadelphia, she meets her first agent, this guy, Jerry Fields. He helps her he gets her entangled in her first record company contract. This would be with Bethlehem Records under a guy named Sid Nathan. Sid Nathan's claim to fame in ensuing years would be that he swindled James Brown out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he would do much the same to Nina. A
Uh,
little bit about her about this first album. This is from the David Brune Lambert biography. So let's see here. So she'd come quote, she'd come in with 14 tracks, all of which were recorded. For the most part, they were faithful but abridged versions of her Midtown bar repertoire. I Loves You Porgy, For All We Know, You'll Never Walk Alone, and the Plain Gold Ring bolero she'd borrowed from the harpist Kitty White. A swing piece called Love Me or Leave Me, the ballad Little Girl Blue, and He Needs Me, recorded by Peggy Lee. Her first album was mainly made up of cover versions, except for 2 instrumental tracks, which she wrote during the studio session. In those days, only a few female jazz artists could claim to be both vocalists and composer-songwriters, and like many of her peers, Nina Simone was primarily an interpreter. For the first years of her career, her repertoire consisted mainly of cover versions of major hits or songs written for her. Only in 1963 did she start to introduce her own compositions. Now, let me read a little bit in the autobiography about this period. And this is about, again, Nina's relationship to music and to fame and to being particularly a pop musician. Quote, what Sid Nathan, that's the owner of the first record company she dealt with, what Sid Nathan didn't know was I wasn't interested in being famous, and I didn't think being a singer was any big thing. All the time I was playing those little tours up and down the East Coast, I made sure that I got back to Philadelphia every week for my lesson with Vladimir Sokolov. I never missed one, and I never stopped preparing my pieces for the next week's lesson. Excuse me. Clubs weren't my serious ambition, so if the money wasn't right and it wasn't fun, I wouldn't play. It was difficult for a man like Sid Nathan to understand that an unknown girl who made a living playing small clubs could turn down a record deal without thinking twice about it. He came back to the house later in the afternoon and said I could do whatever I wanted, so long as I left him with him the next day to go to the studio. I spoke to Jerry, and he said the money they were offering was fine, so I agreed. That was the part I left off at the beginning of that. At first, Sid Nathan, the record owner, was like, "Here are the songs you will perform," and she was like, "Oh no, it doesn't work that way." She's a 22-year-old kid with like no money, and she's like, "That's not what I do."
No.
Which I just love that.
I love that stuff. Yeah. I mean, she's so good, and she knows how good she is. And that is, and at that age, that's rare.
She's in a game she doesn't even really care about either. They're like, do you want to make a record? Do you want to make a hit record? And she was like, well, I'd prefer to be the first black classical pianist to play Carnegie Hall. And if this gets me a few bucks on the way, well, that's cool. But
that is such a great position. It's like Bolaño. Oh, I guess I'll write a novel for some money. Right. I really want to be writing poetry about fascism in Latin America, but I suppose I'll write about the murders.
Right. Yeah. Maybe this is a good time. I do need to take a quick restroom break.
Bring it,
Kevin. Yeah.
I will vamp and talk about season 4. Brad has already posted an incredible trailer for season 4. He does these every year now. Did one for season 3. He did one for season 4. I'm going to make sure that makes its way to the website at artofdarkpod.com. I hope everybody's enjoying this core episode about Nina Simone. If you're new to the podcast really has 2 main different types of episodes. The core episodes are the heart of what we do. These are the protracted biographical profiles of dead artists. The rule is they have to be dead for a year and a day. We don't ambulance chase here at Art of Darkness. The other type of episode we do piggybacks on these core episodes. These are called Darkroom episodes, and those are where we have guests come on and discuss one of the subjects that we've covered. So no doubt someone down the line will want to talk about Nina Simone, someone who has more experience in music, somebody who's maybe written something about her or has very strong opinions, and we'll have them on and we'll talk with them for about an hour to 90 minutes. We also do After Dark episodes. So every episode we post that's free here on YouTube or Spotify or Stitcher or Apple Music or Apple Podcast, whatever it is, we do a bonus episode for Patreon. And Patreon really is the best way to support the podcast. It gets you access to all of those After Dark episodes. And you can find it at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Brad mans the Twitter account. That's at Art of Dark Pod. And Yeah, we also do a book club, and we just did a really exciting episode of that with a nice big group of people who joined us with Aaron Gwynn, the notable expert on Cormac McCarthy's Great Blood Meridian. And we did a book club meeting about that. We've got some really exciting book club stuff coming up for 2024 too. So get on the Patreon train. All of this stuff is evergreen. So if you're listening to this in 2030 and you're like, oh, drats, I missed it. You can go
there.
back and listen to that. You could be an Art of Darkness maximalist. You really can. And it's fun, I think, for people who are really into the show to go back all the way to day one, day zero, where Brad totally phoned in this episode about
relative to how we prep for episodes now. I did.
Yeah, for sure. Brad, the first episode on William S. Burroughs, we didn't even know how to pronounce the middle name. Very sort of a legendary 50-minute episode that Brad did. And we were just figuring it out. We were finding our sea legs. We didn't know what this show was going to be. And very exciting for season 4. And the seasons correspond with the calendar. So 2024, season 4, easy. Brad is going to begin with a Burroughs Redux. He's going to do the now fully evolved, fully realized Art of Darkness treatment about William Seward Burroughs. Right. And I can't wait for that. We're in the middle of this. It's going to be great. Yeah. Anything else you want to say here in the meantime, Brad?
Yeah, no, I don't quite think so. I mean, there's a lot going on coming into the next year. We've got a lot of the episodes sort of planned out. The trailer is out there, which you might have already mentioned. And we're stoked, man. We're coming in hot on season 4.
In the background here, I'm going to post the trailer to the website at artofdarkpod.com. I don't think I've posted it to the website yet. So I'll make sure that did you put it on YouTube or
it is on YouTube.
Oh, it's on YouTube. Okay.
Channel,
so easy. And that YouTube channel is youtube.com/@artofdarkpod. We really appreciate everyone. And I'm going to reiterate, if you have thoughts, if you want to reach out, we're very accessible. We say we're very online writers. We love hearing from our listeners. And we know we have people all around the world checking in on the pod, listening to these core episodes, enjoying the dark rooms. And one final time, if you want to support this podcast, Patreon's the best way. A lot of people are Patreon averse. If you're one of those, chuck us a buck at PayPal, because every time we get a new patron, a little bit of money from PayPal, it means a lot to us, because it's like Nina's playing in Atlantic City and you chuck a $10 bill into her jar.
Yeah.
I mean, she didn't need it. She didn't need encouragement. Brad and I need the encouragement.
Right.
So, and for those who are supporting the podcast already, thank you very much. We'll see you on the After Dark and for Book Club 2024. Brad, before we get back into it, what are the first few book club books that we're going to be doing in 2024? Do you have it off the cuff?
I do. The first one we're doing is Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor, which,
all right,
people who have not read that, is an incredible piece of Southern Gothic weirdo religious stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to get ahead of it, if you're part of the Patreon and you're following along with the book club, you want to get ahead of it, Wise Blood, Flannery O'Connor. We'll have those dates pretty soon. That won't be until February or March. So you have time to read the book.
I think what we're reading after that is Hamlet.
Yeah. We're going to read Hamlet, but I'm also going to say watch these versions of Hamlet. I think we're going to watch the Brana version of Hamlet.
Yeah,
as like a reference. Yeah, because you're not supposed to read Shakespeare. It's one of my pet peeves. Oh, I've read Shakespeare. Well, I'm sorry. Well, you're not supposed to. I mean, you can, but
it's better. It's better than nothing. But it's also not actually Shakespeare to just read it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All right.
Where are we? So, I mean, this is great. What year are we? Bring us back to
we're
Nina
in
Simone
we're
here,
in
Brad.
1950. We're in 1958 or so. She's got her first record out.
Bethlehem the country's what is the Korean conflict is kind of happening.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. World War II is long gone. And it's before civil rights.
Yeah, the civil rights movement hasn't really kicked off yet. Not properly.
Yeah, I'm reading about the Korean conflict. When did that happen?
I couldn't tell you the years.
Yeah, let me look it up because I want
Yeah.
to kind of place this in time a bit. The war began in 1950. So it was actually between 1950 and 1953. So I'm a little bit
Oh,
off.
I thought it was
So
later than
we're
that too.
we're kind of, yeah, I thought it was
Yeah.
later. So we're kind of between wars. I mean, the Korean War was like the first proxy war, of the Cold
Hmm.
War.
Right. Right.
So in any case, so let's put her in place in time. So she's in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, and of course, Bethlehem Records is going to be probably named after Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, right?
I think that's correct. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a huge label, and they would put her album out and do almost no promotion whatsoever. In fact, the only reason it got any attention was that this Philadelphia DJ named Sid Marks got obsessed with the song "I Love You, Porgy" and would play it sometimes back to back. Just loved it, and so it became locally quite popular, and in fact made its way into the R&B charts. A year later, Nina gets hooked up with a different record label, Colpix Records, who she would roll with for a few years. Through a guy named Max Cohen and Joyce Selznick, who's actually, I think, the sister of David O. Selznick, a famous Hollywood producer. And they would put out a record called The Amazing Nina Simone. This is an album that would be hailed by critics and would really kind of cement her as a rising star. So the first Bethlehem album, really only I Loves You Porgy came out of that, and she started to get some notoriety. And then the Amazing Nina Simone comes out, and it's like the trajectory is almost a straight vertical line from there.
Cool.
It did well financially, the record, and it did really well for her reputation. Um, I if I listening through it, I don't think it's her strongest work, and that's not throwing shade at it. It's not the fully realized Nina Simone of the better albums. Um, it downplays her piano playing in favor of kind of pedestrian string arrangements. So you're kind of losing like what's most magical about her. And it also, and this is not only true of Nina, but of a lot of musicians, it doesn't really capture the magic of seeing them perform live. And this is true of a lot of bands where it's like, man, the live show is incredible. And then you hear the studio album, you're like, it's good, but it's not, there's some energy missing. There's some zhuzh that's not here that you can't quite capture in the studio. Um, and so it'd be a while before a producer really figured out what to do with Nina. But nonetheless, this album is really well received, and by September of 1959, Nina has a solo engagement at Town Hall, just a legendary New York City venue. The show is a great success. The New York Times hailed it, and overnight, Nina becomes, according to everybody, the Queen of Greenwich Village in 1959. So, she becomes a regular. She plays at the town hall a bunch, but she becomes a regular at the Village Gate and the Vanguard stages. For people who know anything about the historical and cultural relevance of Greenwich Village, I mean, these are the same stages that Bob Dylan became famous on, and around the same time, not too different.
I
Yeah,
just looked up Bob Dylan to try to place him because, like, wait,
yeah.
wasn't Dylan would have been bopping around there? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure when he started playing there, but it was in the 60s. It might have been a couple years after she started there. But also Bill Cosby was performing there, Dick Gregory, Richard Pryor. She talks about Richard Pryor. She was there the first night Richard Pryor performed at a significant stage, and how nervous he was, and that I think she said he threw up because he was so nervous. And she was like, "You'll be okay." So she's like, she is in it. She's literally, like I said, people would refer to her as the Queen of Greenwich Village. She knew Woody Allen. She knew all these people who were performing there, musicians, comedians, everything. She gained fans like Natalie Wood and Rod Steiger. She went to see a Frank Sinatra performance in New York City, and this is like 1960, 1961. She goes to see Frank Sinatra, and apparently Frank Sinatra later found out that she was in the audience, and he got very, very upset. He might have even fired somebody because nobody went and told Nina that he wanted to meet her. Like, he wanted her to come backstage and hang out, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um
And Sinatra was famously forward looking on matters of race.
yeah, that's true, that's very true. Yeah. And not only was she becoming popular, she started making some money, as you would, right? She gets a 6-room apartment. She's what would she'd be 627. She gets a 6-room apartment with a view of Central Park. Right?
Ball so hard.
Yeah,
That rocks.
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Now,
Nice.
let me
Which
read a.
side? Do you know which side of the park?
Actually, I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't tell you off the top.
Wait, was it in Harlem?
No, she was closer to the village, I believe.
She probably was on the west side then.
She was, I think, on the
That
west
could have
side. I
been
think
either.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Um, okay, so let me read this bit from the bio. And this is around that time, the early 60s. Um, Although among Nina's new friends was the black singer Odetta, born in Birmingham, Alabama. Odetta Gordon grew up in Los Angeles and displayed an extraordinary voice from early childhood. Like Nina with Miss Mazzy, Odetta owed her career to his sponsor, Harry Burnett, who paid for the. Is this the part that I want to read? Yes, it is actually. Hold on. Odetta owed her career to a sponsor. Odetta moved to New York in 1953 and joined the local folk scene, carving out her reputation in clubs like the Blue Angel, where she was spotted by Pete Seeger, then Harry Belafonte. Um, the songs on Odetta's first albums were rooted in tradition, including "House of the Rising Sun," which Nina would later cover. "Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out," and the amazing a cappella "Another Man Gone." Let's see. The record revealed her as an extraordinary mezzo-soprano and pushed her to the forefront of the folk scene. I don't know that I need to necessarily read all of this. They become friends. She becomes friends with Odetta. And Odetta would talk about the fact that Nina was terrified of running out of money, even when she was, quite becoming quite successful. She ends up buying a Mercedes. She buys the silver Mercedes with red interiors, gorgeous car, and she would just drive around New York City all the time on her time off. She had a hat that matched the interior. She had luggage that matched the car. Like she was living it up on this stuff, right? She was enjoying the money. And again, remember, she's a little girl who, when she was 4 years old, she lived in a house that burned down, and they had to build a house out in the woods, and she had to like clean her
Written in the
father's
woods.
surgery. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Now she's got a Mercedes. She's tootling around Greenwich Village, and Frank Sinatra wants to meet her. Right?
And she's in her 20s.
Yeah,
Man,
young.
she could have been a casualty too. I'm glad she lived as long as she did, because
Yeah,
that life, that'll catch up with you,
yeah,
man. That
for
gets
sure.
into your head.
Oh, and it did. And this is the thing. Like later in her life, she became a diva in the positive and the negative sense, right? There's later in her life where she's like, there's this interview, and we'll talk about it more later. This interview she does for the BBC in like 2000, and she's talking about she's not married at the time, how she really wants a husband. She's like, but you got to remember, I don't cook and I don't clean. I'm a star. It's like, well, yeah, you are. Like, yes, actually, yeah, you shouldn't really have to clean, probably. Yeah.
It's like this. I'm thinking about John Lennon right now, and was it Chapman? Chapman who shot him, right? Because he
Yeah.
was a phony, and
Right.
it's like, well, it's John Lennon. What do you think?
Right.
Of course, John Lennon's not going to take the subway.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah, there was maybe some hypocrisy, but like, I don't think John Lennon was pretending to be an everyman. He was just sort of trying to, but he came from, it's complicated in
Yeah,
any
it
case.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times those kinds of standards get held against people, but the people holding those standards to them, they're not necessarily empathizing with what they would do if they were in that situation. You know what I
Right.
mean? You're not really
Right.
thinking like, if I was a multimillionaire and everybody knew my name, how would I act?
Sure. And if I
You
was a
know?
multimillionaire and had a platform like I was John Lennon, and I felt and believed these things, and I came from a working class community in Liverpool and
Yeah.
wanted to sing for the everyman, like what would I do? What's John Lennon going to sing about? He's like, oh, my silver goblets. I mean, like,
Right.
going around in my Cadillac. Like, no, of
Right.
course
Right.
not. So
Right.
it's very, yeah, in any
Yeah.
case,
Yeah.
that'll be for another day.
Yes. Yeah. So, um, okay, so soon she gets invited to play the Newport Jazz Festival. And getting invited to play the Newport Jazz Festival, I mean, this means that not only are you sort of selling records on the charts, but eh, you're also kind of a critical darling, right? This means the journalists like you too, the reviewers like you too, the labels like you too. Now this becomes a sort of a huge moment playing the Newport Jazz Festival, and opens her up into a whole nother echelon of her career. But this is a good time to take a moment to talk about Nina's relationship to quote unquote jazz. Uh, Nina, you know, a lot of her music has jazz elements. She would never consider herself a jazz musician or a jazz singer. Um, Now, part of the reason she resists this category is not just musical, though there's an argument to be made there. She did not like the fact that any black woman who was singing was considered a jazz singer. And I can kind of understand that. She's drawing from all of these elements: old musicals, classical music, pop tunes, some jazz stuff, country, not country so much, but blues and folk music. She's incorporating all of these elements, and somebody's like, and the great jazz singer, Nina Simone. She's like, well, hold up. Like, have you listened to the stuff that I play? Because it's not anything. You can put specific instances of a song she plays in a category, but broadly, it's very difficult to categorize what she's up to. So let me read a little bit from the autobiography about this. Well, actually, I kind of already said that part. Now, here is one thing I do want to point out, because she's becoming incredibly successful in the early to mid 60s, and yet it's always a little there's always some anxiety about it, because remember what she wanted to be. She wanted to be the first black classical pianist. She wanted to live up to Bach, right? She didn't necessarily want to play "I Loves You, Porgy" at a bar, or at a even at a theater. Even though it's nicer to play it at the theater, you make a little bit more money. This is at this time in the early 60s. Quote, if someone had walked up to me in the street and given me $100,000, I would have given up popular music and enrolled at Juilliard and never played in a club again. And I wouldn't have missed the life, because I hated it anyway. The cheap crooks, the disrespectful audiences, the way most people were so easily satisfied by dumb, stupid tunes. So already there's a degree of resentment building in her. And sure, she likes having the Mercedes, but there's also like, I should be at Juilliard. This isn't what I should be doing. So, okay. So now in 1961, I believe it is 1960. Sorry. She meets a man at a club named Andrew Stroud. Now, let me read the bit about them meeting, because this is interesting, and this is an important relationship in her life. Andrew Stroud. And I believe she meets him not in Philadelphia, but she might meet him. I think she meets him in Newark or something like that. Anyway, let's see. Is this the place that I want to be? Yeah. Andrew was a detective sergeant in the 26th precinct and had been that for 14 years. A tough man. The 26th precinct was Harlem, so you knew he'd seen a few things. People around town said he wasn't the sort of man you messed around with, and Frankie Lyman said he once saw Andrew throw a man off a roof. Frank was a junkie, and you couldn't always believe what he said, but the real point was if somebody told that story about the roof, nobody in Harlem laughed. They didn't know if it was true, but they could believe it. They could imagine Andy throwing a guy off a roof. He didn't say anything about it either way, but he had a strong and solid air about him that made you think, well, maybe. And Andy wasn't tough to be around, not domineering, but you knew all the time he was there. Sitting in my dressing room with my back to the door, I knew the moment Andy came in, even if I couldn't see him, because I felt his personality around me. On our first dates, I realized his reputation when we went into a club or a bar. First of all, everybody knew him, and he knew everybody. Some guys would look up as he came into the room, check him, and just slide away without saying hello. The people that he did talk to were always respectful and quiet, because Andy hated a guy getting too excited in his ear. And he was quiet and calm always, and always in control. That's what I like most about him, that I felt safe when he was around. No one would dare do anything to me with Andy there. And so about a year later, they get married. She gets, and again, this thing about the kinds of men that attract this solidity, I think, for her was like, okay, this guy. And she would later say about him, like, Andy could protect me from anything except for Andy. And so, yeah.
Well, and this seems to follow so naturally on the thing you were just describing. You have this sensitive soul, a prodigy, a genius, a
Mhm.
generational talent who can play Bach, but who, through circumstances, is forced to play in, well, maybe not forced, but
Yeah,
well, let's say forced
yeah,
to play in these nightclubs and these seedy bars. And she's living in New York City. And I could see why you would want uh, that kind of presence around you.
yeah.
There's still this dynamic in New York City, by the way, between men and women. It's very
I'm
interesting.
sure. Yeah,
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 I won't go too far into it, but
yeah,
yeah, it's still a gnarly place to live, man.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So excuse excuse me, December 1961, they're gonna get their the plan is to get married. Uh Something happens before the actual ceremony though. And late 1961, Nina comes down with either non-paralytic polio or spinal meningitis, and she spends 17 days in the hospital, a time in which Andrew Stroud stays right by her side. And if anybody's ever been in this kind of situation, you know how much that can like breed intimacy. You go from we spend time together, we go on dates, and it's nice to like, oh, this is actual like life crisis. How does this person respond? They either run away or they get closer. In this case, they
Hmm.
got closer, and that just attracted and Nina made Nina even more attracted to him because oh my God, this guy can actually take care of things, right? And he's talking to the doctors, he's handling things. He's like immediately goes into I'm going to take care of shit mode. Um, so she had 2 months off ultimately of work, and he's right there by her side. And she after this she takes him to Philadelphia to meet her family. Um, Nina's father right off does not like him. Is like this he backs away, doesn't really talk to him. He's sort of survey does not like Andrew Stroud. Um, and in fact, doesn't go to the wedding. Nina's father doesn't go to the wedding. She doesn't like this guy so much. But okay, after this meeting in Philadelphia, I think it's in Philadelphia that Andrew Stroud asks Nina to marry him. They come back and they're literally celebrating the fact that they're now engaged. They go out dancing in New York. Stroud is drinking rum, which apparently he rarely, if ever, drank. And at the club, literally celebrating the fact they're getting engaged, a fan stops Nina for an autograph. She's got fans. She's famous, right? Um, she signs the autograph, and the fan hands her a piece of paper. She slips it into her pocket, doesn't think anything of it. She's a star at this point. There's gonna be weird stuff with people. He confronts her out of jealousy about this fan. And then there is this from the biography. Um, oh no, hold on a second. I'm on the wrong page. There's this from the biography. Da, 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 da. Hold on. Where did it go? Okay. Um, where is this? Okay. So again, slips the piece of paper. Quote, Andy saw this, stood up and asked her about the note. Dina explained about the fan, a harmless note, nothing more than that. He didn't believe any of it and began to yell at her. She burst out laughing at his jealousy. Andy stormed out of the club. She ran after him and, seeing him look for a cab, caught up with him and took him by the arm, calling him honey. He turned around and hit her. Eventually, a cab stopped. Andy forced his fiancee inside and continued to beat her. He beat her, quote, in the cab, on the pavement outside my apartment building, in the lobby of the building, in the elevator up to the 12th floor, and along the passageway. When Nina finally made it into her apartment, she was covered in blood with open wounds on her face. Andy was out of his mind, screaming like a madman, pushing over the furniture. Bruised and battered, Nina explained to her fiance that there was no reason for him to get so worked up, but he began to question her. A cop, drunk with pointless rage, interrogating his fiance and punching her when her answers didn't suit him. He made her say all sorts of nonsense. She panicked and told him about letters Edney, her high school boyfriend, had written to her when she was at school in Asheville. Andy pulled out his gun and held it to his future wife's temple, ordering her to go and find them. She took them out of his safe and obediently handed them to him. He tore them from her hand, ripped them up, tied her hands behind her back, and made her sit down in a chair. Andy Stroud forced Nina Simone to read out several passages aloud, asking her questions, beating her the way he would have beaten an uncooperative suspect at the police station. This went on for 5 hours. He finally freed her from her ties, led her into the bedroom, and raped her. On the night of her engagement, she was taken by force. She screamed as her attacker moved on top of her, letting her go only when he was done. At last, his trousers around his ankles, Andrew Stroud fell asleep. Nina Simone spent 2 weeks hiding her swollen face at a friend's apartment in New York. No leaks. No one knew of her whereabouts. Gripped with fear, she thought that Andy being a cop, he would manage to find her. She was right. The minute she set foot outside, he cornered her in a cafe. He paled as he saw the wounds on his fiance's face, blinking in disbelief as he said, "Who beat you up like that?" And she responded that you did. He denied it adamantly. He stared at her, searching his memories, unable to grasp what he'd done. He told her that he didn't understand, that he wanted to marry her. She remained cold as ice. "You're sick," she said, and demanded that he go and see 2 psychiatrists. She was scared. She wanted to be sure, thinking that a seed of violence lay in him and that he would do it again. The psychiatrist's conclusions diverged, one of them advising Nina not to marry Andy, obviously, the other talking about temporary insanity. She hesitated. Nina wanted to have a family. She wanted to be a good wife and mother. He swore that it would never happen again, cajoled her, winning her over. He told her they'd buy a big house, that she could spend some time decorating it, picking out furniture, that they'd have a real life as a family. Not once did he mention money. That would have been out of place, and he'd have to explain how, with his meager cop salary, he could fund such lovely projects. Well, her money, right? How does one say no to such a vision when one's life is nothing but a succession of clubs and tours? Andy, her man, someone to share her success with and build a future, a home, and who was she to turn him down? Andrew Stroud married Nina Simone on December 4th, 1961, in her apartment. The bride wore white and held a bouquet of 15 white roses in her arms.
He was drunk, right? I mean,
He was drunk. Yeah. And she married him
Some
anyway.
people get jolly when they're drunk.
They do.
Some people end up in
I'm a
the
jolly.
hospital. You're a jolly drunk.
I'm a jolly drunk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Chatty, jolly
I'm in
drunk.
all kinds of drunk.
Yeah.
I'm a drunk for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that is
And this
frightening.
isn't, and I mean, I think most people, the night of your engagement, if you got even yelled at, you might be like, you know what, forget this, right?
I,
This doesn't seem right.
I
Yeah,
could see yelling, because it's a lot.
it is.
It's an
Yeah,
emotional time. People are
sure.
drinking, and then you figure like, and nowadays too, we would maybe go like, okay, well, there's maybe some childhood trauma. I mean, and
Right.
clearly this guy, I'm not fucking running cover for this guy, but like
No,
you go, he's seen some shit in Harlem. The guy has clearly, you would say,
something.
probably
Yeah,
PTSD. He's all fucked up. I mean,
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
he's doing to her probably happened to him, or
something.
some variation, or he saw it. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
that's ugly, man.
but
Ugly, ugly. That is one of the ugliest things that we've covered so far
it
on Art of
really is.
Darkness. That's up
It's
there with
rough.
Burroughs shooting his wife.
Well, he could have killed her, right? I mean, he
Yeah.
literally had a gun up to her head. Like, read this letter from your high school sweetheart and explain to me what this means. And if you don't like
Sounds
your
like
answers, I'm going to beat you.
a poem.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Holy
Totally crazy.
moly. Wow.
Yeah. So, okay. So 2 weeks after she marries Andrew Stroud, go ahead. Nina travels to Nigeria. First time she leaves the country, and she performs to perform a concert. She never left before. And at this time, she was being sort of taken under the wing of James Baldwin and Langston Hughes. People who know them know that she was like a friend of theirs, and they saw her as instrumental to valuable, I should say, to the civil rights movement. Langston Hughes even wrote a song called Backlash Blues for Nina to perform. These are basically prominent literary voices in the New York African American community. The trip to Nigeria was organized by a group called the American Society for African Culture, and she performed a concert in front of the largest audience she had yet ever seen. Right. So this was very this was a important moment for her, and we're going to see sort of why later. But traveling to Nigeria, playing this concert, meeting people who live in Africa, that sort of thing. She she left the United States, a very popular musician, went to Nigeria, and she came back a kind of a revolutionary. Even if at this point her ideas and her motivations were not quite fully formed. Let me read a little bit on this from the biography. The Lagos quote, the Lagos concert took place in a city center stadium before a human tide whose like Nina had never seen. The cultural shock that she went through and the certainty that the forces surrounding her were benevolent and familiar grasped her like a revelation. She was a member of an ancient line. She would later learn in very dark times, following a mystical experience, that her ancestors came from a land at the heart of the ancient kingdom of Dahomey in Ghana. She would actually end up buying land in Ghana at one point. But for the time being, a certainty was growing in her. She felt that she carried a tradition that had been relocated, but whose spiritual essence remained intact. Nina Simone was a soul on a mission. The concepts that Jimmy, that's James Baldwin, had taught her confirmed her intuition. She was to perpetuate and defend her race, her culture, the thread coming from that land which had survived the Atlantic crossing to come into being in America in her.
Uh-oh. Nina's no longer deracinated.
Right. Yeah, watch out.
Ruh-roh.
Yes. Now, while she was in Africa, she comes back, and Andrew Stroud, her husband, has established a home. He had bought a house in Mount Vernon, inner suburb of New York City. That remains to this day largely, I think it's like 60% black even now, and it was at that time as well. Her house was 13 bedroom. Their house was 13 bedrooms on a 4-acre plot of land on a street that would later be Malcolm X Boulevard. So, and in fact, they would live very near. She never knew Malcolm X socially, but the widow of Malcolm X would be the godmother of Nina Simone's daughter. And Nina Simone's daughter would be best friends with Malcolm X's children. So this is where we're at geographically, but culturally, historically. Okay. Stroud, while Nina was gone, Stroud set up this whole house, got furnishing, the various accoutrements, and he basically started the process of turning Nina Simone into a business. He would quit his job. He would quit being a police officer and become the manager, the president of Nina Simone Incorporated, for, to put it as briefly as possible. Eventually, this business would grow to have at least 19 people depending on it for their livelihood. It was a real enterprise, the Nina Simone empire. And he would also rapidly build her career in terms of, and turn it into sort of a nonstop cycle of shows, touring, traveling, recording, television appearances, radio appearances, right? He had her going all of the time. He put a blackboard up in the kitchen that said, Nina will be a rich black bitch in X days. And he would keep moving the date out further and further and further as she became more and more nationally known.
Gonna keep working. Gonna keep grinding.
Exactly. And later on, she would be like, he worked me. I was like a racehorse or something. Like, he would just drive me and drive me and drive me. And every time I said, I'm, can I get a day in the schedule where, like, maybe I can sit down and eat a meal? He'd be like, you got to, his point was like, this ain't gonna last forever. We got to make as much money out of this as we can. And one day, you and I, honey, we won't have to do anything. But right now, we gotta,
You should. This is a good insight into our production meetings.
That's right. I write it on the chalkboard. I say, Kevin will be a rich black bitch in.
Whoa, spicy.
Yeah, sorry,
Whoa.
guys. Hey, man.
Okay. All right. All right. That's the old Art of Darkness spirit that everybody's pining for.
Yeah.
This show ain't what it used to be. These fucking guys.
All right.
It's never going to happen because you know what?
Yeah.
Forget it. Just back away.
Yeah.
Move on through the bio.
January 1962, Nina is pregnant. This is Lisa Celeste Stroud. She would be born September 12th, 1962. Nina was performing almost right up to her birth. We're going to talk more about that relationship later. Lisa is a singer and composer in her own right. She's had a number of major Broadway credits, handful of albums. She's not hard to find. I think she uses the name Simone now, even though she was born Stroud. Now, here is as good a moment as any probably to talk about Nina Simone sort of vis-a-vis the civil rights movement. Just trying to think about how to position this and like I said earlier, we have an international audience. I don't know what the average person's understanding of this time period in history is. So and again, you could talk for hours and hours and hours about the 1960s civil rights movement in America. It's difficult to know where to stop and start it. So I'm going to try to give a few things as they are relevant to Nina, so we can put Nina in there and people can understand what she meant to it. The civil rights movement that we're kind of talking about really, quote unquote, starts in 1954 and quote unquote ends in 1968. The reason I'm saying start and ended is the Civil War abolitionist movement part of it? Kinda. Is Black Lives Matter now part of it? Kinda, right? It doesn't really begin and end in any strict sense, I guess. But the capital C, capital R, capital N movement is generally defined as 1954 to 1968. So it kind of comes out of the fact that, after slavery was banned or made illegal, a sequence of a series of systemic practices were put into place to, maintain racial segregation, discrimination, disenfranchisement. People know about Jim Crow laws or laws passed particularly in the South of America that made it difficult for Black people to vote. And these are the kinds of things that are what we call now systemic racism. And people who, throw that term around. It used to mean, at least, that literally there's like a law on the books that, like, yeah, we don't allow Black people to buy houses in this neighborhood. Like, that would be written down someplace, right? And that sort of thing.
Irish need not apply. Irish need not podcast.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have been allowed to podcast in the 40s and the
No.
50s and Brad.
Joe Rogan would have called us and
well, Joe Rogan's one of it. He's Italian.
Joe Rogan wouldn't
they
have been
never
allowed
would have
to do it
fucking
either.
let him. Yeah. They would have lynched him in New Orleans.
That's right.
The history of race in America is far more complex than anything the public schools will teach you.
It's so complicated. I mean, they literally try to turn it into like a black and white issue, and it's so complicated. It's unbelievably. That's why I'm trying to walk this delicately while also giving you kind of a 30,000-foot view, and it's tricky to talk about it. So there's all kinds of things. I mean, there's efforts to prevent the great American dream. Whatever you think about the American dream, whether you think it's all lies, whether you think it's over, part of the American dream is about social mobility, right? It's about the fact that, hey man, the idea, again, a dream, some people will say it's a dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. But the idea was, you're going to be allowed to pursue happiness. You're not going to be guaranteed to be happy, but you're going to be at least allowed to give it a try. And if you work hard and you're talented, you're going to be allowed to do better than your parents.
Yeah.
did,
and I think that not even talented, there was a quality of, like, if you can just be stable and sorted and reliable and a stand-up person, right? You're going to make it. You're going to make it. You're going to have the little house. You're going to have your kids.
Right.
Your kids might have a better life than you did. And, as long as you can, not show up drunk on the job, be steady, that was sort of the bargain hitherto.
Yeah.
That's all gone now, of course.
Yeah. And I think one way to look at the civil rights movement in this 1954 to 1968 part is the awakening of the Black community in America of, like, hey, we haven't been allowed to access this thing.
Right. And not just the Black community. There were
others,
people of
for
color.
sure. Right, for sure. We're not this. You claim this is the thing, and all we want is to participate in this thing. That's what we want, right?
Right. And the iniquity of the Head Start is just so brutal. And the people who have had the 100-year Head Start or the 200-year Head Start tend to be oblivious and blind to. Just how devastating that is. Generational wealth is like the big leg up that lets you just fuck over everybody else around you. Mom and dad bought me this house. What's the problem? Meanwhile, it's like, Yeah, and nobody else can. Well,
Yeah.
that's not that kind of podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, so one marker of the sort of quote unquote beginning of the civil rights, and again, these boundaries are very blurry. But one thing that's often cited as quote unquote the beginning, I guess maybe back up for a second. So there are laws, local state laws that are working towards the disenfranchised, basically keeping Black people away and other people away from the opportunities that by all rights, if you follow the Constitution, should have been afforded to them. But then there's also just kind of the racism of everyday interactions, right? What it's like to live in a town or whatever. And one of more on that level was what happened to Emmett Till in 1955. Emmett Till, people may know, he was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago. He was visiting some family in Mississippi, summer of 1955. He spoke to 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant, who was the white married proprietor of a small grocery store. There's been some dispute about what actually happened between the two of them. Worst case scenario is that he flirted with her and maybe whistled at her. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. 3 nights later, Carolyn Bryant's husband and her brother-in-law abducted Till from his home, beat him to death, shot him in the head, and sunk him in the Tallahatchie River. Okay, now that's horrific. But what really pissed people off was the next part. The all-white jury found the two men not guilty. Later, they confessed to doing it in an interview with Look magazine, but could not be tried again because you can't try again a person twice for the same crime.
Look magazine, the magazine that Stanley Kubrick was a photographer for.
Maybe he did their photo shoot.
I
don't think so.
I highly doubt it.
Doubt it. Yeah. And so this story was kind of emblematic of a practice, a thing, a cultural phenomena, I guess, that had been happening for a while, though it had tapered somewhat, of lynching. And for people who don't know what lynching is, I'm sure most people have heard that word. It's basically street justice, primarily in the American South, generally racialized, right? To enforce discriminatory cultural norms. Though in truth, it's not just Black people that were affected. If you were in the wrong town and you were the wrong kind of person of any stripe, you might find yourself hanging from a pole, hanging from a tree. In 2017, the Equal Justice Initiative found that over 4,000 Black men, women, and children fell victim to what they term racial terror lynching between 1877 and 1950. Of these 4,000, 654 of them happened in Mississippi. Mississippi was the worst place for these things, where Emmett Till was lynched. So if we want to think about Nina Simone's role in civil rights, she would have been aware of that. We can maybe start with that and bookend it with the 1968 assassinations of Martin Luther King and then Robert F. Kennedy a few months later. That's his period, and there's a lot going on in between. We've got notable figures. I'm not going to name everybody. There's a lot of important players in this. Martin Luther King, outspoken proponent of nonviolence. His idea of how this should be accomplished, the dream should be accomplished, was boycotts, sit-ins, silent protests, civil disobediences, marches, etc. Sort of the other pole of Martin Luther King on one. On the other pole would be Malcolm X, who was assassinated in 1965. Malcolm X, for people who don't know, was an ex-convict who used the momentum, reach, and ideology of the Nation of Islam, a Black nationalist organization loosely related to mainstream Islamic traditions, to kind of get his voice out there, get his message out there. Malcolm X was a charismatic speaker, highly effective leader who spoke for freedom by, quote, any means necessary, which of course included violence. Malcolm X had an autobiography that was co-written or helped by Alex Haley come out, and it's amazing. I recommend everybody read autobiography of Malcolm X. It is quite a story, and he led quite a life. Okay, so that's one end. I guess I'm just trying to show the spectrum. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, a lot of stuff in between. Marcus Garvey is in there. Black separatists are in there.
It was a period of political assassinations in the country. Of course, you can't forget president.
Right, right. Yeah,
John F.
1963, John
Kennedy.
F. Kennedy was
Yeah,
murdered. Yeah,
the coup,
yeah,
that happened in this country. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. The yeah.
It was
We're
crazy.
going down to the docks here. Yeah, no, it's crazy.
It's
This
crazy
country
times.
has never recovered and probably never will
No,
recover from that
no, and
period.
I think a lot of times when people refer to the '60s, when they talk about a lot of, I think when people don't think about it too deeply, it's like, yeah, the music was kind of cool or something. And it's like, yeah, that was
It
part of
was
it.
pretty
It
cool.
was
Yeah.
pretty cool, but like
Mm.
also like if you were saying the wrong message, somebody might just shoot you in the
Yeah,
street.
if you stepped out of line,
Yeah.
there was a rifle waiting for you
Mm-hmm.
somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, between these two polls, somewhere was a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, often referred to as SNCC. Um, this came out of student-led sit-ins at segregated lunch counters in the South. There was also out of this, there was eventually the Black Panthers, Marxist-Leninist Black Power organization started in California in 1966, which advocated for violent resistance, but also self-empowerment of the Black community. If I come off as disparaging any of these people or groups, I apologize. Certainly not my intent. I'm trying to go kind of fast over this stuff because the history of the Black Panthers is fascinating. If you try to encapsulate what they were up to in a sentence, it's going to rub somebody the wrong way just by the nature of things. I'm just trying to paint a picture of who were the players, what were they up to. Um, now, Nina, so those are just kind of sort of pieces I'm putting on the board, and we're going to show how Nina interacts with these as time goes on. Now, Nina started her career, as we've said, she just wanted to be the first Black classical concert pianist, which in its own way would be a civil rights accomplishment, right? That's very much a quote unquote making history kind of thing. Um, During her time, it's sort of almost apolitical political activism in a way. It's like you don't have to say anything about what's going on, you just do the thing, right? During her time in Greenwich Village, she gets to know pretty well, like I said, Langston Hughes and James Baldwin. She also becomes very, very good friends with Lorraine Hansberry, the critically acclaimed playwright behind A Raisin in the Sun. People may be familiar with that or at least heard of that. Um, these people, Lorraine Hansberry in particular, were giving her a kind of a radical an education in radical politics, history of Black people in the Americas. And in time, over time, they're sort of schooling her into how important this is. She starts off and she just wants to play the piano, for crying out loud. And eventually, after this trip to Africa, her friends are some of the most prominent intellectual voices in the Black community at the time. She's starting to get a wider picture of what's happening, and also realizing that she might have some power in all this, right? Famous musician, right? Has some money. So she wants to get more involved as an activist, but remember what her husband's doing. Her husband is show, record, a television appearance, radio appearance, interview for like he's trying to make Nina Simone Incorporated make as much money as possible. Andrew Stroud could not care less about politics, civil rights movement. He's a Black dude. He doesn't give a rip about any of that. He in fact would later say, like, I don't know why she got all involved in that stuff to begin with. Just doesn't matter to him whatsoever. And that will be part of the conflict later. Yeah, so let's see. Oh, 1963, Nina finally does get a headline show at Carnegie Hall, the Hall of Halls, which makes or breaks you as a concert player, right? And she played her most Nina set yet. This was like she was going to do her thing. The only downside is she doesn't play Bach. And later on, she would say she regretted not playing any Bach when she was at Carnegie Hall. And much later, when she's like in her 60s, she at one point says, quote, "I'm sorry that I didn't become the first Black classical pianist. I think I would have been much happier if I had." Right. So it's just a sort of a sad moment. All this success and all this notoriety, and she comes to this thing. She still didn't actually do the thing she dreamed about doing in a way, right? But
Right, and at the
here,
end of her set for
a
an
little
encore,
bit,
she could have come out and just blown them away with a surprise,
the people
but
would
she
have let her
didn't do
do
it.
it. Yeah, she
Yeah,
just didn't do it
well,
for
you
whatever
can't.
reason.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hmm.
yeah.
Well,
Let me
I'm
read.
sure there was a lot of pressure because the reviews that come out of that are going to be like, they're going to determine your career.
Super important. Yeah.
Yeah,
let me actually read this bit about, I have exactly about the reviews. Quote, at Carnegie, this is the
Isn't that funny?
1960s.
Hang on. Isn't it funny half the time I make a comment, you're like, I'm just about to talk about
Yeah.
that. That's weird. It's
We're
the
synchronized.
seance, the
Yes.
telepathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
We
right.
both, we're the only people who know how to do an Art of Darkness episode. So, and you know, it's we're tuned in. At Carnegie, quote, at Carnegie, Nina played a mix of popular pieces reinterpreted using her classical training. John S. Wilson, a New York Times columnist, wrote the following about this pivotal concert. Quote, Miss Simone seemed totally absorbed by the atmosphere of the moment. She has a way of being so relaxed and loose that as she performs her pieces, she is able to cross through several degrees of dramatic intensity at will. Miss Simone has a very developed sense of the dramatic and of contrast as when she plays a popular song with a primitive, repetitive, and sensual rhythm. She is a highly talented animal on stage with a great sense of how to give a show. That is why, even when her ideas are not a success, which can happen, it is interesting to follow the wanderings of her audacious imagination. And it goes on to describe a little bit about what she played, and then
holy shit, though.
Right?
Whoa.
A talented animal
is a talented animal. We're talking about systemic racism. One wonders if you would say the same thing about some diva from Paris who's come over. Yeah, that's some gnarly shit. What's the name of the reviewer?
John S. Wilson. I assume he's dead now.
I hope he's
it's weird because it's if you are able to forget about the racial dimensions of saying something like that for a second. How to say this? There is something. It's a unique review. Like in a way, in the positive sense, it's like there isn't a thing like this. Is somehow like this is different in a powerful way,
it's
right?
Vital and kind of immediate, but it's very patronizing and ugly.
It is.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah.
Oof. Yeah. This is why I wanted to read it, because it's sort of like she's being accepted, but is she, like
you play Carnegie Hall and you're called an animal.
Right.
I would be so fucking angry.
Right.
Yeah.